So, I mean, the place where I decided that, we should start this episode is with this MSI hangover topic that we're seeing a lot of, because pretty much one thing that we've seen, and obviously for viewers don't know, Mac, head coach of Mad Lions, went to MSI recently, just returned, respectable finish, went 2-3 to Dalmon, which was considered one of the top teams in the world. And now what we're seeing is that every team that attended this tournament goes back to their regional league, and they are pretty much shitting the bed for the most part. I mean, Mad Lions probably doing one of the better, having one of the better performances of what we've seen. But like RNG and LPL, I've been watching their games. They're like 1-4, and I think they're in 14th place or something right now. It's looking pretty grim. I'm not going to say that they're not going to make playoffs or anything, but there's a chance. I mean, it's not looking like they're going to be a solid Worlds contender if they don't pick up their form really quickly. What do you think about this idea of like going to MSI potentially harming you as a team, Mac?
So I think, what's the best way to phrase this? I'm trying to think if there's like a good analogy for it. I'm not sure if there is, but I think it's really, really, really good if you can actually like bounce back from being tired, basically, and being super burnt out. Because like, especially this year, the MSI schedule was like crazy, like absolutely crazy.
So you had to go earlier in quarantine and stuff, I'm guessing, right?
Earlier plus quarantine, which wasn't that bad. Like the quarantine was pretty well done, and the hotel was really good. But because everything was condensed, because there was no longer a playing stage, they like mushed everything together, right? You had to play like 2 games every single day for 5 days in a row, which, considering that it's not just that you have to play those games, like you have to warm up, you have to get there a few hours before, you have to do makeup, you have to do your prep, you have to do your draft meeting, you have to watch all the games of that day. It's like a 14-hour day, when you actually sum all of it up together, like 5 days in a row, which was crazy. And that was just like the first stage, right? So it was pretty intense. So I'm not surprised that teams are mega burnt out, especially a team like RNG who or Damwon. I think Damwon are doing like okay, but not great. But they have other extenuating circumstances, right? But in the case of teams that
they changed all the fucking roles of the players.
Yep. Sure. But like in the case of teams that have to travel even further, yeah, like I think it's really rough. Like everyone was just so tired afterwards. On our end, because it's a pretty long split anyway, even when you don't count in MSI. So especially with, I mean, there are so many like different factors that add into it. Like there's the fact that COVID is a thing now, so you have quarantines on both ends, right? So in my case, like I had to go back to the UK after Iceland and then spend 5 days in the UK and then immediately come to Germany for a 2-week quarantine. So I've spent like 5 days at home this year, basically, and the rest of it in Berlin, because I don't actually like live in Berlin when we're not in season, right? And that's obviously the case for a lot of players as well. So it's pretty tough on people who aren't able to like see their loved ones, or people who aren't able to travel, or whatever like personal stuff people have going on at home, which they always will. It's pretty rough not being able to actually go back and see people and spend time with family and decompress and all that stuff. And then you get back to the spring split, and you have Viego, who's been disabled for God knows how long, that we obviously haven't been playing because we're at MSI. Then you have Gwen, who's new. Now you have a Mundo rework. And now you have a Tom Kench rework. Like you have so many new champions that you have to learn in like 4 weeks. So yeah, I can understand why it's a thing. Definitely, it's pretty taxing. But on the flip side, when like the experience that we get from actually going to MSI and scrimming there, because the scrim environment is really different to Worlds, right? Like at Worlds, you go and it's really hard to get scrims against top Asian teams, especially if you're like the 3rd or 4th European seed, which has been my experience when we've been, is that like, good luck getting scrims against the top Asian teams. Maybe you scrim them once and they decide whether or not you're worth scrimming again. And then if they body you, then they just never scrim you again, right? And then you're scrimming either other European teams or NA teams or playing teams or whoever else it happens to be for the rest of the tournament. Whereas at MSI, like they can't be that picky because there's only one Chinese team and one Korean team. So you get to scrim good teams like every single day, which was really, really, really good for us in terms of actually like challenging players on things that they haven't been punished for in Europe. Leveling them up and just having super consistent high-level scrim practice, and it challenges your ideas of like meta and things like this, right? Like a lot of European teams, for example, are not very good at picking like super hardcore winning prio lanes early and then just snowballing. And I think this is why Rogue is so successful in Europe, is because they actually do that and they do it pretty well. But in Europe, you can get away with not doing it, and usually you can outscale against teams that aren't Rogue. But that's not the case when you're scrimming against RNG and Damwon every day. They'll just flatten you in 10 minutes if you don't draft enough prior. So there's a lot of learning curve, but there's also a lot of, I don't know what you want to call it, like mental exertion. There's a tax that it places on you that you have to pay when you get back. And I think it will, in our case, I can't speak for anyone else, but in our case, for sure, it's going to take a while for that for us to pay that debt off.
Yeah, I mean, when I was asking the question, I mean, I definitely was considering the exhaustion and all that stuff that you're going to have to deal with. But another angle is just the fact that you're playing a patch behind for that amount of time, where like other teams are presumably scrimming on the patch that they're going to be playing on. And especially like from the lens of like top Asian teams, do you think that there's a world that we get to where teams might decline MSI because, like let's say RNG doesn't make Worlds, like they had to go to MSI. They are scrimming in a region where they're getting lower quality scrims. They have huge quarantines there and back. And then like in a super competitive region, you're potentially just going to fall behind on the meta. And like these wins early on in the season, they really matter because they're going to determine your seeding for the bracket of LPL playoffs, which obviously the way that works is the higher rank you are in the regular season, the less series that you actually have to play. So do you think that there's like any issue with when it comes to like trying to adapt to the meta, or like you might be scrimming a bunch of teams on a prior patch and you might be learning things, but those things might not necessarily be applicable depending on how the game changes in the future patches?
For sure, like adapting to patch was hard when we got back. We had like 3 days of practice before the actual split started, and especially that's the case if there are big changes in the way that things work globally, which there have been recently. Like, for example, there was the jungle XP changes, which I think were quite significant. There's inner towers now being worth way more. There's 2 new items been released this weekend, right? So there's a lot of global changes as well that you have to adapt to, which is really rough. In terms of refusing to go to MSI, I doubt that would actually be possible, but I can see teams not wanting to go. I can see teams being annoyed. But I mean, in Europe, we at least have a buffer in that we have championship points, right? So even if Mad Lions comes in playoffs in 6th, because we have so many championship points from winning Spring, we'll probably still be top 4, which still means that you get your 2 lives in playoffs type system, right? In LPL, does it not work like that?
I think that the points are a lot less if there are points. I think it's significantly less than what it was in Spring. So I'm pretty sure that they'll still be able to like potentially. I'm not sure if it works the same way it did last year. Last year, the way it worked is there was like a gauntlet specifically. So like you had the summer play and then you had the gauntlet, which I know in other regions sometimes they would kind of be one and the same. So I think that like the issue there becomes that the teams that might be qualifying through the gauntlet, you might end up with one of these absolute banger teams from summer. Like let's say LNG or something makes the finals and doesn't win. Yeah, like that could be one of your potential opponents in the gauntlet.
Yes,
and yeah, you don't want to be running into like the second best team and have to play them for a world spot. Because like let's say FPX it gets 3rd or something, they would probably go through on points. So I think that's like the issue that you run into there. I mean, I think that from here we could jump into.
We need to reframe that if you want to have that discussion though, Dom, because basically the question needs to be reframed like this. Would it like actually potentially decrease a team, we're picking top Asian teams here, would it potentially decrease a top Asian team's in Worlds at the end of the season if they went to MSI versus if they could stay at home and stay like in the LPL region or LCK, for example? Because the idea of like, would it happen? Almost certainly not. I mean, by the way, one reason is just a very boring cultural reason, which is countries like China and Korea are mega hardy to win international competitions in any game, field, or sport. Just go look it up. Like, it is a bit, those stories are, when they tried to meme it in League where they're like, oh, and if we lose, we have to swim home. Dude, that's what they actually literally unironically say to you if you come like 3rd in a Worlds and you were supposed to win Worlds from Korea. Like, they actually legit are like, you've disgraced the country, like you don't represent Korea. So basically, like, no team from China or Korea who has a chance to go and like win a big trophy and show their regions the best, like they would just do it for that reason. But if you want to do the abstract of like, would you actually have a better chance, like would RNG basically not have potentially had this hangover that they're having now because they don't look very good at LPL, and would they potentially still be a top team, therefore has it cut away at them? What do you think on that angle, Mac? Like, ignoring like whether you choose to attend or just, do you think like for you, I can understand why it would give great experience to your players, but aside from them them playing Damwon essentially, which they can probably already do in scrims, they probably didn't gain a massive amount of RNG from winning the tournament, right?
No, I mean, they can scrim Korean teams anyway, right? Like the Chinese and Korean teams can scrim each other anyway. So, I mean, does it actually hurt them? Potentially. I mean, even if you look at a team like G2, like one of the thoughts that I have coming back into the split is, oh shit, G2 have actually had a holiday. Like these players have actually been able to rest. And like some of these teams have been scrimming like since we were still in MSI. Like they'd had their holiday, rested, come back, and were scrimming while we were at MSI trying to get practice against top Asian teams and stuff like that, right? And I know that G2 did. Yeah. So if that's the case, like how much more rest time have they had than my players, and also still actually got to scrim top Asian teams, you know? And that's a big worry, because I mean, that's a limitation that G2 has had to deal with for the last however many splits, right? They've had basically no holiday for the entire year. And now I'm thinking like, okay, we won a championship. Now we have to come back, and now we have to fight like with 3 days practice on patch that we have like not that much info on champions that we haven't played, because we've been competing up until like very recently without these champions in the game against players that are like well rested and more experienced. So for sure there's a disadvantage there. Would G2 have still preferred to win the spring split? Like, yeah, for sure. You're going to take every championship you can get, right? Is it actually net disadvantageous for experienced players who are already accustomed to playing on international stages? Yeah, there's a pretty good argument.
Interesting. So since we just hit on RNG, I feel like the next thing that we can segue into is, you know, the first European player that we've seen in the LPL. Obviously, you coached him last year in Shadow. He's been doing pretty well in LGD. LGD looks like they've found a little bit of a resurgence. I mean, they pretty much rebuilt their old roster with the like exception of a couple players. The players that actually were traded off in Mark and GA just came back the next split, which I've never really seen before. Normally, it seems like when you cut ties with the team, like you've actually cut ties with the team. But yeah, I mean, I think the Shadow's kind of been a mystery in the community. People didn't really know, like, if he wanted to play in LPL, if he took the split off, if you guys just simply cut him after the Worlds performance. Some people were saying that he had such a good split, like in LEC. He had 2 good splits in LEC. And then as soon as he, like, you know, underperformed in Worlds, he was immediately removed. Is there anything that you can, like, share, like, now that he is on an established team? It's like he has a home, he has a job again. Like, is there anything you could kind of like fill fans in with, like, how this decision was made, and like if it was like mutual in any way, or how that whole situation went down?
Yeah. I mean, obviously there are some things I can't comment on, but I can give kind of a broad overview. I think there's a lot of revisionist history about Shadow and how good he was in LEC. Like in LEC, he was insane in regular season, and then I think he had some fairly disappointing playoffs series and a disappointing Worlds as well, and that was a big concern for a lot of us. And I can say that fairly openly, I think. There are some things that I can't comment on that were kind of internal issues that we had, but the main thing that we felt was about roster balance. We felt that like we were kind of capped, even though Shadow was like a really, really insane individual jungler. Like we didn't have what we needed to actually progress as a team, which was like in-game leadership and communication and ahead planning and things like this. Was it mutual? No, I think Shadow was for sure really surprised, and I felt pretty awful at the time. But looking back, I think it's also fair to say it was the right decision. But Shadow was adamant that he, like when we told him that we were going to look for another jungler, he was adamant that he didn't really want to play in Europe unless it was for like a top team, and that if he could go to LPL, he would take it like no matter what. And he had a bunch of stuff to sort out, like logistical stuff, before he could go to LPL, and there were teams that were interested in him in the off season, but it wasn't possible in the end. So he decided to like take the time off and then go eventually, right? Which was the right decision for him, in hindsight, for sure. So
when you say the teams, do you mean other LEC teams were interested in him?
No, so there were LPL teams, but there were 0 LEC teams, which frankly is disgraceful. Like the level of scouting that, or just like understanding of like talent scouting and the jungle position that like people have to recruit some of the players that were recruited into LEC this year over Shadow, like without even wanting to talk to him, is just unbelievable. But hey, that's what it is. So yeah, I mean, he's doing really well in LPL though, and I'm super happy for him. Like, no problem whatsoever with Shadow. He's a great guy. He's a great teammate. I got a lot of criticism in the off season for actually publicly defending him and saying that he was a good teammate and a good player, which he is. And then obviously people wanted to know why we were changing jungler, which is fair enough. But I think looking back, it's hard now to criticize that decision because I think it was the right decision for us and it was the right decision for him. But yeah, for sure it was tough on him. But yeah, I'm super happy for him, and he's performing super well in LPL.
Yeah, definitely.
To the level that he did in LEC as well in the regular season. So good on him.
Yeah, when you talk about roster balance, I assume that you mean something to like around the like idea of him being like a strong mechanical player, but maybe not having like the leadership qualities or the ability to be like super decisive in game, potentially the same way Elyoya is. Is that really what you're getting at when you're talking about roster balance? Because Shadow's a first-year player. I mean, he was a rookie, right? So you'd assume that a player like that would have a lot of potential. Like, he would have a pretty high ceiling if he comes in with a high base level of mechanics. Did you feel like there was just things that he like was not going to be able to get, or there was a role that you needed him to fulfill within the team that he just wasn't able to?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about him being a first-year player and having a high ceiling. His ceiling is insanely high. Like, mechanically, individually, Shadow's ceiling is crazy high. But I don't think in terms of, like you were saying, leadership qualities, communication, like there are broadly speaking players who are proactive and reactive, right? There are players who are leaders and followers, and that's just the case with people. People tend to have a preference for what they want to do. Like, do they want to shot call the game and tell other people what to do, or do they want to be told what to do and follow? And Shadow is an amazing reactive player, and he's amazing at being decisive, right? If he sees an opportunity, it's not like you can't say that Shadow isn't decisive after seeing him like make some of the plays that he's made, because he's really good at finding engages. But they are reactive engages in that he's like punishing mistakes or punishing people being out of position or seeing a mechanical play, right? Or like based on just what he can see in front of him, rather than setting them up like really deliberately and engineering them really perfectly and coordinating all of his teammates around them to find this engage in the first place. That was not his role on Mad Lions, and that's not what he's good at, and that's what we needed, which is what Elyoya does now. Elyoya's like probably, I would say, the biggest voice on our team now, actually, in terms of the person who just actually speaks the like highest number of words in comms. So yeah, that's more or less what I mean by roster balance.
One thing about that topic that I feel is really misunderstood by fans especially, but even a lot of coaches, I get really disheartened when I hear them talk about it, is when they just talk about the notion of like shot calling and comms as though anyone can just be trained to do this at like an elite level. It's the stupidest premise ever, because not like you were saying about leadership. Listen, in theory, someone who was very determined could improve their current level. But the idea that they could become one of the best, which is what by definition you're trying to do if you compete in a league like the LEC, it's the same scenario, right, as when people colloquially say, like, how can this bloody mid laner not learn, like use like leader, for example, how could he not learn bloody Orianna? It's like, the question instead of that isn't why can't he learn Orianna? It's what you're saying is why can't he be like a top 10 Orianna in an entire region? Because if he isn't, by the way, what's the point? What's the point in being the 12th best Orianna player when he's the best Echo player? Like, it doesn't make sense. So similar to me, yeah, in theory, every player can learn some aspects of, like, what is the team concept right now? How do I interact with the teammate? Maybe they can give some information in shot call, but you definitely cannot train any player to be a shot caller. And I've always thought that was like, I know that coaches just didn't want it to be that there's only one person. They were trying to break free of that constraint, but they've gone too far the other way on that one. Because if the description you're given here, Mac, makes perfect sense. Like, it doesn't matter that my eyes showed me Shadow was super sick when he was playing those regular season games. If he wasn't someone who could be exactly what you needed to elevate the team, and maybe you needed a different leadership figure, then he just wasn't the right player. Doesn't mean he was a bad player individually. Like, I don't even think there's much scandal on that one. It makes perfect sense, the reasoning you're given.
Yeah, I mean, I think that good team balance and good roster building is about finding people whose specialisms complement each other. And that's a balance that we didn't have last year, and that's why we were a really one-dimensional team. And now we're a much more multi-dimensional team that could play through various lanes and can do various playstyles and things like that, because our specialisms complement each other. And, you know, then you have lots of parts which add up to more than the sum of the value of the individual parts, right? Like, that's just the way good teams work. So yeah, I'm a big believer in specialized players.
I always say the best team, like, just look in history, it isn't actually what you might naively think, which is you just take all the strengths and stack them. The best team ever is where my strength covers one of your weaknesses. So it looks like we don't have a weakness. And obviously the dream is like, that just happens to everyone collectively. And as a result, in theory, the best team, every player should actually be overrated, because they're actually not as good as they would appear. They just don't seem to have any weaknesses because all the team meshes.
Yeah. That's why I'm a big fan of Greg Popovich. I think Popovich is great because he has that like model. And I mean, maybe we're going off topic here, but I love
No,
talking
go
about
for it.
coaching. So
No,
let's
go
talk
for
about coaching. So the idea that you have like a couple of central players who are the like all-rounded, you know, if you had like a top trump score, you know, it'd be like 9 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 9 out of 10, who are like offense, defense, passing, whatever metrics you want to measure
Sure.
by in basketball. You can then like it's not realistic to assume that you're going to get star players in every role, and it's not even good most of the time, right? Especially in a game like League of Legends where you have a finite number of resources on the map. Like you can typically feed like 3 out of 5 people on the map, but you can't feed 5 out of 5, right? So you should get someone who's really, really, really specialized at being a supportive player, right? And that's very much what Greg Popovich did. He would always have like a central couple of players who were stars. Like there was the big three with Tim Duncan, and then they kind of handed off to Tony Parker. And as Tony Parker got better and better and better, and it became clear that he was going to be the new star of the team, then the old star players like either retired or got sold off or transitioned into being supportive players.
Yeah, Ginobili came
and the
off
rest
the
of the
bench and all
roster,
that stuff.
yeah, and the rest of the roster was comprised of people who were role players or specialists, which is what I call them, of people who are like, sure, I mean, this guy's not very good. Maybe this guy's not very fast, but he's really good at jumping high and blocking people from putting balls in the net, right? Like he can block people super well, or he can rebound super well. And your job is going to be that you are going to rebound balls for Tony Parker. That's your job. Do that job, and I don't care what else you do. And in that way, as you were saying, Thorin, like it looks like this guy doesn't have any weaknesses because he's putting up like mad points because Tony Parker's getting inside the enemy defense, but like shooting, missing, and getting rebounds. You're like, oh, this guy's insane. Like, why is he such a good offensive player? Well, he's not. He's just insane at rebounding, but he's a specialist that complements your star players, right? So that's very much like a core part of my belief about good roster building and good talent scouting, and that's like something that came into play a lot when we looked at Elyoya. Is like we determine like what niche we have, right? We need this type of shot calling and this type of leadership, and like I could go away and look at 10 different junglers, and like if I just went and watched their games, I could be like, well, this guy's mechanically worse than Shadow, this guy's mechanically worse than Shadow, this guy's mechanically worse than Shadow, because like if you look for that, I mean that's Shadow's strength, right? That's his specialism, but that's not the specialism we needed. So we went to look for Elyoya. It was okay, let me listen to your comms. I'm only going to listen to your comms. And who's the guy that does it the best? And Elyoya was the guy that did it the best by far in terms of leading his teammates, being proactive, planning ahead, putting people on the same page, being a good communicator. And so we just took that guy, right? So you're hiring just for specialisms. And it turns out that Elyoya is also really insane mechanically and a super hard worker and like has an amazing like level of motivation and is really intelligent and like all of these great things, right? Which came up as bonuses, but that's the reason why we went for him in the first place. Because he is a super specialized communicator.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question that I would ask you there is how confident were you in his ability to actually do this as a rookie on stage? Because normally if you were trying to find that role of like, we want somebody who's, a shot caller that has like the ability to lead a team, like normally that sounds like veteran qualities, or at least what in League of Legends we've considered as like the veteran qualities. So how did you make this decision to go to a rookie, and how confident were you in his ability to actually be able to do that on stage? Because it feels like a lot of the time people have this mentality around a player. I think we're kind of seeing it with Schalke, with Kare. I mean, he's obviously a veteran player, and people will argue if he's good or bad now. Obviously, he's looking really terrible in LEC, but I think that was kind of the idea, that he was supposed to have this like veteran presence, this ability to lead, this decisive shot calling in game, at least being able to communicate what path he wants to do. So how are you so confident in Elyoya as a rookie to be able to do this over somebody who's a proven veteran?
I think there's a lot of components to that. Firstly, just getting to know them. I mean, we're really, really, really rigorous with interviewing people. So it's like a super long process, and we do a lot of psych testing and things like that. And a lot of the conversations with our sports psychologist, psych testing, VOD review that I did with him, a lot of the testing that we did basically came back with the results that we thought that he was really, really, really suited to leadership. We thought that he was going to be extremely well adapted to that role. So if it's a role that naturally fits him, he's going to be better at doing it anyway. So like what we're asking of him is very simple, like before a game, typically I'll say to a player, like, this is what I need from you in this game. And that's something that you can give to Elyoya. And if that's something that they naturally do anyway, and it's a natural part of their specialism, then obviously it's going to be really easy for them. So that's one part. It's just that he's just really naturally attuned to it. The other part, I mean, the games that I was listening to of his comms were from EU Masters, so like they were big stage games for him at that time. So he was doing it there, so why would he not do it in LEC? But there's also the argument that he's like doing it in a team full of like world quarterfinalists. Well, no, not full, but a team of world attendees with a world quarterfinalist in humanoid, right? But I think we try to have a super open environment in the team, and I think that helps. Part of the culture is that it's really open, and that the relationship between the staff, and I mean this is fairly common in most European teams in general, just culturally, but everything is pretty horizontal with us, in terms of like there's no real hierarchy of like who has more standing in the team or anything like that, and that's something that we strive for a lot. So from day one, that's something that's really important to like make sure that we are committed to, I suppose, in terms of the way that we lead and the way that we talk to people and stuff like that. But more than anything, I think it's just Elyoya. So I mean, I was pretty confident because of those reasons. Obviously, there's always a risk, right? Some people got burnt. Like I think Vitality got a bit burnt with Sigenda, who I thought looked really good, and then didn't transfer into the LEC. Sigenda was one of the rookies that I was actually most excited about coming into this year. I thought that he was going to be super good, but it didn't translate. So yeah, I mean, you can get burnt sometimes, right? But we're also fine taking long-term bets on people. That's something that I've always been happy to do, and I think that's just good business in terms of like when you sign a rookie player, you should be willing to give them like multiple splits to be able to develop, which I think a lot of teams have struggled with. And you're seeing right now in LEC, there's like a huge turnover of players, of teams that are getting rookie players, cycling them out, getting rookie players, cycling them out, and everyone's like looking for the next big thing. But like it's not that simple. Like you need everything to be in place. You need to have hired the right people that go with the right people. You need to have the right coaches. Like you need to have the right infrastructure. You need to make sure that you make them comfortable. Like you need to manage the transition from them leaving home for the first time or whatever the hell it is, right? Like there are always challenges, and I think like those things especially can impact rookie players to like a huge degree. Being away from home, being away from loved ones, being away from girlfriends, not liking the food in the new country they're in, not like being suited to the weather so they can't sleep properly. Like all this type of stuff is stuff that our management does like an insane job of coordinating with players on, and they're really thoughtful with it. And that's something that we invest into a lot. So I think we can manage some of that better than a lot of other teams in Europe. And that's, I would say, a big factor as well in being confident that you can actually like support rookies and just be okay with it as they grow. So yeah.
Yeah,
By the way, when earlier you were saying about how like with Elyoya, you can just tell him going into the game, like here's some things to like look for basically, or here's how I want you to play, right? How much of your coaching style, since you're someone who obviously has an interest in like the wider sporting coaching world and the premise of like coaching as a meta context, right? A question I would have is this, is like when you go into a game like that, in League of Legends specifically, compared to a lot of other games, it is very much about like giving them a game plan, and then you can't do anything because there's no timeouts, you can't like come in and there's no like appropriate moment, there's not even a half to the game that you can say something. Basically, you have to sort of, it's one of those like fucking machines where you set the ball rolling and you have to hope it all just goes how you plan, right? Well, the problem with that as a premise is, by definition in League of Legends, it almost never goes how you plan. Like the amount of interactions with the champions and the jungle and a million factors can happen, whether you get a scuttle at a certain point or you don't. Like so many things can obviously throw off that like perfect machine, right? So basically your game plan can never usually be what you hope it would be. So I want to know is how do you offset that? Because I know, for example, a lot of like, this is in my opinion a red flag that someone's like very new to the idea of coaching. A lot of people do what fans do and they go, well, you have to be confident. You have to believe that your plan will work, and you have to, you have to do that, otherwise you won't win. Because everyone, for some reason, on the lowest level of being fans of sports, they sort of understand positive thinking, but then they think that works in every regard. Whereas I've heard, for example, like Bill Belichick of the Patriots literally will actually run players through like nightmare scenarios. Like if this happens, we're going to be fucked. And if this guy fumbles and stuff like that, like basically what he's trying to do is sort of, it's almost like exposure therapy for like, right, look, the worst thing that's going to happen happened. What would we do in that scenario? And you'd also teach people, you can recover from these things. There's ways to do it. Like, do you have any thoughts along those ideas? Because I've always thought in League, I've seen way too many games where I sort of got the premise of what they were trying to do from the draft, but something goes totally wrong early game and you can just see that teams fall apart, So since you've worked with so many rookies, what's your philosophy on that?
There are a few things. I mean, there's that classic quote, isn't there, that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, which is which is true. In League, like you can't plan for specific things, right? I think more what we focus on when we're telling players stuff like that is this is what's going to be important in this series. Remember, you're up against this guy who has these tendencies, and therefore getting scuttle crabs, or timing your raptor camp, or like if it's jungle, or watching out for him doing lane gank at 440 after he's like on top lane after he started on bot lane, or whatever it is, right? Like these specific tendencies that come up. In terms of drilling people to expect bad things to happen, I didn't know that about Bill Belichick, but that's pretty cool, actually. I mean, it reminds me a bit of Stoic philosophy, which is where basically, like, it's supposed to be really good for anxiety. And there's like two kind of differing schools of thought on this, right? There's like the positive self-talk of like, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, like self-affirmations, mantras, and all of this stuff, where you visualize all of the good things going well. This is something like Michael Phelps does, where like there's this really famous story of him jumping into the water and his goggles come, like not only do they come off, but like they half come off and they fill with water, so he can't see anything in like his Olympic race. And he does it perfectly, does his whatever the thing at the end of the length is called, I don't remember, where they turn over in the water. Yeah, sure. He does his turn like perfectly, nails it, breaks the world record, gets a gold, and people are like, what the fuck? How did you do that?
He essentially did it half blind, I'm guessing, in this scenario.
He did it like almost fully blind. And he said the reason is because he visualized every single stroke, and he does it from like multiple angles. He visualizes it in the water, looking at himself above the water, like all of this stuff, right? So that's like the first like preparation method, right? And then you have Stoic philosophy, which is very much like you visualize every single thing that could possibly go wrong, and then you say, okay, well then what would we do? Well then what would we do? Well then what would we do? And the point of Stoic philosophy is that eventually you get to a point where you realize, well, actually, the world's not going to end. It's going to be fine. Like, even if all of these things happen, and then we lose, and that's the conclusion you get to. And then it's like, well, and then what? Well, and then I go to bed and I wake up the next day and I go to practice and things will be fine. And that's supposed to be really good for dealing with anxiety as well, actually. It's something that's really recommended. So those are very much like two, I suppose, differing philosophies on that. But yeah, for us, it's very much about giving people clear focus goals in terms of what they've been practicing, what's going well. And also a lot of it is about reminding their teammates of things, right? Something that I say to the players a lot is make sure you micromanage your teammates, or, make sure that you remind this guy of this thing, right? Or remember that when you do this, it helps your teammate a lot. Like when you communicate this specific thing, that really helps this guy. So do that often, right? If someone, I don't know, struggles with understanding when they're supposed to roam, if you can give them a focal point, like this jungle camp is spawning, can we contest it? That's a really, really good thing for them. So we remind players of that a lot. On the more Stoic philosophy side of things, something that we say to them a lot is also, okay, like, and this is something that I think helps a lot with rookie players as well, is that like, I couldn't care less if you mess up. I could not care less if you completely int the game because you were doing like an aggressive play that went wrong. You didn't calculate that enemies had TP advantage or whatever the hell it is. What I care about is how you respond to the mistake. What I care about is that afterwards you do something to fix it. Like you take responsibility, you take charge of the situation, and instead of becoming quieter, you become louder and you fix it. And that's something that I also think helps rookie players a lot, is them knowing that if they make a mistake, I'm not there in my review room tapping my foot and frowning and scowling, and I'm not going to like get the belt out and bash them when they come back in. Like I don't care if they make a mistake.
Of the Nelson approach. Okay, sounds good. I mean, so
is that the Nelson approach? I don't know, Nelson.
I mean, yeah, no, he tweeted that out. He's like, I'm gonna belt these people after one of the G2 losses. So, yeah, no, clearly a joke there. But there was a couple interesting things you said. So, the first thing that I wanted to address was you were talking about the turnover, and that was the topic that we had last week, where we were kind of arguing from the point of like, because there is so much turnover and because people are like always trying to get like
it's for jungle role, right? Is that what you're referring to now?
No, I'm just talking about in general for rookies, like for players in the LEC.
I see. Okay,
there's so much turnover, and we think that a lot of that is because of the franchising model, because you can't get eliminated. People are more willing to take these massive risks. But I mean, the question is, do you think that because there is so much turnover at this point, that now it's starting to overall harm like the quality of the league, because you have all these teams trying these, random changes or like these really extreme changes without a fear of potentially getting relegated?
Yeah, I mean, the really self-centered part of me wants to say that teams are trying to copy like Mad Lions and Rogue that are like getting rookies and then like becoming actual good teams, right? But I think people, it's really hard to say because it has gone like really well for some teams and there have been some really good rookies. But I do get the feeling that bottom teams are kind of just flipping it and being like, well, if it doesn't work out, then we change at the end of the year and we try again next year. And if it does work out, great. And like in a system with no relegation, that's a smart thing to do, right? Like I've often said, if I was in like, I don't know, SK's position or whatever, I would flip it, right? Like when, like for example, they signed, like when Misfits signed Vito, for example, like Vito was really young and like he looked super good in European Masters, but like the general consensus that I heard around VTO when he joined the league was that people thought that he was insane and he was going to be super insane, but he probably wasn't ready for LEC yet, right? Like I think he was signed when he was 17, if I remember correctly. And that's like a long-term flip, but like you don't care if you tank Spring Split if you're Misfits because you're already tanking Spring Split. Like you've already been like a bad team last year or a team that missed playoffs. Sorry, you've already been a bottom 4 team last year. So like, why do you care? You just flip it, right? And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And I would have done the exact same thing for sure because I thought VTO was really insane. But like, could I have like in a theoretical world, could I have like sold Humanoid last year and gone and got VTO? Probably not, because like we are a team that's like at the top of the table and we're looking to consolidate on that success, right? So like taking more risks isn't appropriate at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question then becomes like, what do you think about the teams that are doing it consistently? Because, you know, with Vetio, I listened to, I think Deficio was on Summoning Insight, and like his whole mentality around, Deficio's whole mentality around signing Vetio was that if you get him now and you let him play in LEC for one split, even if he runs it down for the entire fucking split, the amount of experience that he'll gain within one split of LEC is worth like years of experience in ERL. So that's like worth it time period to like allow somebody to grow. I think the issue is that we're seeing like players like Zagenda, who you mentioned, players like Chekolad get one split. That split doesn't go well. They're immediately out the door. Like, what's your take on that approach towards rookies? Like, do you feel like they're not given enough time to like really grow and like show what they're worth?
In general, I think you should always give a rookie 2 splits to develop, but sometimes there are like external things, or sometimes there are things within teams that like I obviously don't know about, right? Like people forget that Upset had like an awful first split in the LEC, and his first split on Schalke, like he was having a really, really rough time, and like it was clear that he was dealing with nerves. So then in summer they changed the jungler. He had like way better performances, and then they were suddenly like actually a really good team. So yeah, for sure, I think that people are not getting enough chances. I was sad to see Checo go because I like Chekolad. So yeah, I mean, in general, I'm not a big believer in changing out a rookie after one split, but there are always some things that are just like where, I don't know, let's say for a player that like the player is like just unbelievably stressed and like cannot handle the pressure by the end of spring. Like it's not fair to ask this like 18-year-old kid that you've dragged away from their home, from their ERL where they were a super successful top player that was really confident and is now like a shivering bundle of nerves and like an absolute wreck to carry on playing. Like that's also not a good thing to do for like some poor kid's mental health, right? So it's always going to be case by case, but in general, I'm really against changing out rookies after one split.
I've got a couple of takes on this. One is, first of all, everyone can't look at this and go, oh, see, they're just gambling and trying out players. No one's got any eye test. Yeah, no one's got any eye test. And here's how you know. Because what's ridiculous to me is, I get the people who look at someone in the RL and go, he looks really good. Let's try him in LEC. It didn't work. Where's the coach who then goes, cool, they've already given him his first split's worth of trial. I've asked through my certain source network, and, you know, teammates said he was good, but maybe the coach didn't use him this way, or, you know, he had issues on state. Where's the guy who goes, give me that guy then? He's already had a split's worth of time. Maybe I think my coaching staff's better. Maybe I think I've got teammates that would work better. Like maybe I've got a veteran player that works. I want to see the people who can reclaim these guys, because the idea that they're all one and done, they're not, are they? Like, as if someone like Leader hasn't shown everyone at this point in time, like he is clearly a fucking LEC player. He always was. The problem was people just were so put off by that one split 2 years ago that no one would give this guy a try. So I want to know, first of all, if all the coaches in the scene want to big up their knowledge of the game, well, why are you only going off results? Try fucking doing some investigation, because I'd rather be investigating a guy who had one split that maybe wasn't as good as everyone thought it should have been than just trying to ask about ERLs, where, as you say, they're a big fish in a small pond. Like, they're just dominating a bunch of other rookies that have never played. The other part is this, which is, when they do these approaches where they try to boost like a guy, especially it's one thing, right? If you're bringing him in to be like the least important role in your team to just be the last piece to complete it. Most of the ones we're talking about, like Vethio, they're bringing this guy in to be the franchise player if it goes well. Like he's going to play the most important role. If you bring him in based on the style of play they had, same with that blue guy for SK, they're supposed to literally be like one of the best players in the league eventually. And you hope you're going to build your whole team around them. So the idea those guys get one split is like, what? Dude, what history are we going off here? Fucking Caps. He wasn't Caps in the first year. Half the time he used to end the fucking game and Reckless would just be like, Jesus, again, like we lost another game. Then, let's go get more names. Everyone loves to bring up Rogue, like you just said there, Mac. They never bother mentioning that Rogue was an already existing core that had played an entire split in the academy system, even played in your EU Masters, which they failed epically and didn't even make top 8 up and get out the group stage, and then got promoted in the summer as three of them, literally all who played together. One of them, by the way, it was a veteran fucking like support shop caller. So it's not just like a bunch of rookies you've thrown in a mixer. And even they had to have time. They had to have time to get promoted. Then, if you remember, actually, they were like mildly underwhelming. They probably on paper should have been above Schalke in that summer split. It wasn't basically for almost a year before they got like to be the Rogue we know now, like really dangerous team. Oh, these are definitely all the rookies I'd stick with. Anyone could say that in hindsight, but the point is no one was going that hard at the time. In fact, even some of the players they had in their team, like, no one gave a like, I never heard any hype around people like Inspired before they got into LEC. Everyone now will tell you they always knew he was a genius, he was going to be better. You just don't get it. So, like, I think not only are people way too quick to get rid of these players, but their expectations are ridiculous for what they think the player's going to, like, coming in. Like, think about it. Not only are there lots of really good players who had a bad first split, there's loads who did the other way around and had the one super hot split and then just fell off in the summer split. So, like, I think the idea that these guys are going to walk through the door and effectively, by the way, just be Caps and Reckless the next day. That's what you're trying to tell them to do. Otherwise, you're going to kick them and gamble that the next guy can be Caps or Reckless, which, spoiler, those players can't be those players in the first split. So I find the whole premise like a very convoluted, like messed up way of thinking, because I don't even really know what the test is against. Like, what test did the guy fail? Like, if you play mid lane in LEC, it's your first split. God bless, mate. Like, it's going to be hard for you. It's going to be really fucking hard, and it should be. You're supposed to be one like the top 10 players in a position in an entire fucking continent, mate.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Rogue has been a really good example of like long-term, sustained, like piece by piece change around like an existing core, right? They found their core in Larson and Inspired initially, and then they built around that, right? And then they got like specialists who contributed really, really well to those people's existing strengths, right? All the way up until they signed Odo, who was like the best possible player they could have got for the style that they have, right?
Yes.
Like Odo fits that team perfectly, consistent. Which is why they were so good, right? Like Odo and Alfari would have been probably the two best players in fit for that team in terms of what that team like actually did. Although Alfari had become more of a strong side player in like the last couple of years, but back when he was on Misfits with Hans Hammer before, he was like an insane weak side player, right? So like those two players would have been a great fit. So I think Rogue has done a super good job of roster building. The other player who's actually, I think, gone under a lot of people's radars, who's been a big success story, who's like gone up and down. Like he was initially on UOL, then he was on Misfits, then he went to European Masters, then he went on to Schalke, was Neon. And Neon's done a great job actually of like, and he's improved with time, right? He's a great example of someone who has gotten like consistently better every split, I would say. Like when he was first on Unicorns of Love was in, I think it was 2019. Like he had a pretty rough time. And then in Misfits, he had a rough time, like in a like fairly rookie roster, and then got demoted, and then did like way better in Misfits Premier, and then went Schalke, and suddenly has been in like multiple playoffs and has looked really good. So there's another good example of a player who's actually developed significantly over time. Because Neon's always been a player that's had like really insane hands. He's vocal, he's committed, he's hardworking. Like he just needed time.
Yeah, I think that Rogue, the thing that not enough people give the organization credit for is like actually having belief in the players. Because if you think about like the first split they had, I mean, as a rookie lineup, they were already getting top 4, and it was just because of points that fourth place wasn't good enough to get them into the gauntlet. They had the Larson package into the fountain that everyone remembers. But I think the thing that's lost on them is that their second split, so that was spring of 2020, was not that good. Like they actually placed lower, and they looked worse like from the eye test than expected. I mean, they ended up getting 5th, and the organization actually saw the promise. They knew what changes needed to be made, like some coaching staff changes or just different mentalities within the coaching staff to actually allow that team to have the tools possible to win. So I definitely think that they're one of the shining like bright parts about Europe when it comes to rookies. Since we've been talking about just like franchising and turnover and things like that, I just wanted to get your take on this because one thing I've been seeing in the community is people saying that LEC looks worse like this summer than last summer in terms of like overall strength. I mean, G2 and Fnatic were obviously way at the top. Both of them, I mean, Fnatic looks okay now, but they don't look as dominant. Like you used to always feel like G2 and Fnatic would always be in finals. You don't really get that same vibe when you watch LEC now. And there's a bunch of different takes on this throughout the community. Yankos says that, you know, we haven't really got worse. Everyone else just got better. And then other people have the mentality of like the whole league got worse. If you look at the bottom teams last split and you compare them to, or like last year and you look at the bottom teams now, you'd think that like, oh, Origin looks way better than a team like SK or a team like Astralis or a team like XL. So where do you really come down on the overall strength of LEC? Like, do you think it's just as strong as it was before? Do you still think that it's a region that's primed for a semifinal finish at minimum in Worlds, or how do you evaluate the region as a whole?
In terms of have people improved, if I think back to 2018, which was my first split, like we got third place on Splice that split, and my God, were teams bad. Maybe that was just a particularly bad split, but like, holy crap, all we did was scale. Like we literally just scaled and hoped for people to mess up, and then like had really good vision game, and then just won games by default. Like we won so many games just because people like couldn't finish with 3 prio lanes on a stronger jungler. Like so many games. So from that perspective, I think people have gotten a lot better for sure. I think people have gotten a lot better. I think a lot of people have copied the style that G2 and Fnatic innovated a lot throughout 2018 and 2019 to be able to actually play the game way faster. Which is what like they did so well. That's why they were good teams, just because they played the game way faster than anyone else in Europe had previously. And I think there are a few teams that can do that now. Like I said earlier, I think Rogue has been able to do really, really strong early games in the same way that like Eastern teams do. Like when we're at MSI and we're getting like attacked early by Damwon or RNG, the only team in Europe that will do that to us consistently is Rogue. Like no one else will even close to do what those teams will do. So at least you have one there. In terms of are we as strong as China and Korea? It's hard for me to say for the whole region because I've only scrimmed against Damwon. And for example, I thought that Damwon was like way better than anyone else in Korea by like a huge margin. Like I think the gap between 1 and 2 in Korea was massive. China, I think, is a pretty scary region. I think a lot of the teams there would just like demolish most of the LEC teams, to be honest with you.
Yep.
And I felt that RNG, like from scrimming them, I felt they were significantly better than Damwon as well. Like, and maybe it was like worst matchup for us, right? I can only go from my own experience, but our scrim win rate against RNG was a lot worse than it was against Damwon. So I felt like China would be the stronger region overall if you compare top 6 to top 6. But I think it's easy to assume that the region has gotten worse because people often judge by only the top 2 teams. And in previous years, like Fnatic and G2 were the only teams that were actually good. Like they were the only teams that actually played even remotely good League of Legends. I think everyone else was pretty bad, including Splice, who were in theory the 3rd best team in 2019. Like we were the 3rd Worlds attendee. Maybe other teams would have been better. Rogue may have actually beat us if they got into the gauntlet. To be fair, they beat us in playoffs. And then we went gauntlet and then went through. So I mean that was pretty heartbreaking for them, right? But I don't think that us or Rogue or whoever else was there, was it Schalke? Yeah, we beat Schalke to go in 2019. I don't think that any of those teams were particularly good at League of Legends actually. So
maybe Spring Origin, but that's about it. That's the only one.
Yeah, Spring Origin were really good.
Maybe
Spring Origin were actually like really good. They played really nice League of Legends, but in terms of like the actual quality of the league, I would say like it was just G2 and Fnatic being good and everyone else was bad. I think G2's got slightly worse this year. I think Fnatic has been through some tough times. So I think it's fair to say on balance they've gotten worse, but maybe they're on the rise again. But I think just actually the level of the whole league is just closer. But on balance, people have gotten better. Are we better than LPL? No. Are we better than the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th teams in LCK? Maybe. I'm not sure. I don't think it would be uncompetitive between those teams. If you exclude like Damwon, I don't think that the top 6 would be like one-sided for Korea at all.
The real shame is that obviously Abidage went to LCS and 100 Thieves. Can you imagine what the LEC would look like now if Schalke had their like original mid lane? Like holy f***, the playoffs would be exciting.
I mean, I think the bigger problem.
Stacked.
I think the bigger problem is jungle for that team. Like, I feel like Nuclear Int is like doing, you know, what you'd expect. And I don't know if IWDominate would be able to carry some of these games with how hard Correa is running it down, which is like really, really like, I don't know, like disconcerting to me, because when I watch this guy play in like solo queue, I always thought, yeah, this guy definitely like knows what's going on, because you can tell kind of when somebody's playing solo queue, what their playstyle is. And generally I feel like I have an eye for like what would work and what wouldn't work. Like, is this person like an honest player in solo queue? Like, do they actually make correct plays on the map? Like, are they, you know, reading waves, like diving at good times? Are they taking objectives when people are, you know, on the other side of the map? Or are they kind of just like snowballing through getting a million kills? And I always thought Correa had, you know, talent. But it's just it's so surprising seeing how he's, you know, looked in LEC. I mean, I think he's looking like the worst jungler right now, and it just makes no sense to me if you know, watch how he plays, I guess, when there's no pressure on. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'm always I guess worried about when you have a player, and I wonder how much of that is just the player himself or the coaching staff around him. Yeah, like when you have a coaching staff like, you know, Mad Lions, where you guys are used to incorporating rookies and players from ERLs into you know, LEC, how much could that actually help someone like Correa, who is making his, like, I would say, like, official LEC debut. I don't really count the Misfits days for like Neon or Correa or Leader or any of them. So yeah, it's interesting to think about.
I think the meta has been pretty tough for Kira as well, to be fair. Like when I think about Kira, I associate him with like all of these like hardcore snowballing ganking junglers, you know, like the Rek'Sai, Elise, Gragas.
Oh, okay.
Not so much the Talia. Like I actually don't think that that's his niche so much. Like I think Kira was usually at his best when he was like hardcore ganking people, and like snowballing the map and running into enemy jungle and like fighting people to the death, which you can do with some of the carry junglers, right? But like, for example, like the Talia, I wasn't that surprised to see him doing poorly on, because I just don't think that's his style. So maybe the meta's a bit bad for him as well, to be fair to him.
Yeah.
Our problem with this is, like, I just genuinely don't give a fuck if Kira ever makes it as an LEC pro. And here's the reason why. He's not even vaguely a rookie. The guy's older than fucking God. He's played League of Legends, like, semi-pro, like, from probably before Mac was even in the fucking scene. Like, he's been around forever. So the problem in this scenario is, we're not just saying, has this team who's brought him in now, in this specific case, obviously Schalke, have they, you know, are they misusing him? It's like, dude, nobody's figured out how to use this guy. The story's been the same the whole time, Dom. It goes like this. It's always a teammate of his from the challenger level who goes, oh, he's actually really good. Or people go, he's fucking amazing in solo queue, he's so sick, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, then what? Then reverse engineer it. What could possibly hold a player like that back every time they get to the LEC level? Like, my issue is this, basically. If I ever find out it's something psychological, I just tap out, because that is, by definition, the most difficult part that any of us could help someone with. Realistically, you probably have to help yourself with those issues and just get sort of pointed in the right direction. And it's also way above the pay grade of analysts and coaches. Like, we aren't there to fix people's brains. Like, we're just there to find people who are good at the game and sort of steer them in the right direction, you know? So my problem in that scenario is, it looks to me like he has some sort of massive, like, performance issues when he's on stage. I mean, even just in LEC. Every time he's gotten his big call up, it reminds me of the Golden Glue guy, mate. It's like, they obviously do impress people in the scrims and when they go to the lower level below, and they play so well that every person goes, look, even though they've had the issues in the past, I'll take a gamble on him. Fuck it, it'll work. But unfortunately, I think the same problems tend to hold these guys back. Who knows if it's psychological? Who knows what it is?
Yeah,
I don't find that one that hyper storyline, personally. Like, even when he was coming in this split, mate, I wasn't that in for it. Like, to me, the bigger issue with that story was like, you hated Gilius this much. What the fuck did the guy do?
Yeah,
like, did he kill someone's dog or something? What is this? Like, I thought that was the bigger shocking part of the story to me. Wasn't that they were adding Kira, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something to talk about right there, which is like Gilius. Like, where is this guy? Like, I felt like he definitely performed as like a top 4, top 5 jungler in LEC last split, and then for some reason, I mean, there's been rumors that SK might have hit him up, and then he was like, okay, I'm not going to join that team. I'm not going to go from like top 4 to joining fucking SK. So, I mean, I think that makes sense, but, you know, it's so weird to me that a player like Gilius is just not able to find a spot on any of these rosters in LEC. Doesn't make sense.
It was the same for Shadow last year, right? Like, Shadow was a consistent top 3 jungler in the league for like basically the entire year. Like, I think it's really hard to argue that Shadow was anything less than top 3.
Definitely.
I mean, maybe you could put Inspired up there with him as well. So like, maybe you can say top 4, right? But yeah, like I don't think there were many teams that were interested in him at all during the off season, which was just like crazy to me.
Yeah, I think the difference there is like how Shadow, like the last performance that they gave, right? Because Shadow after Worlds, everyone looked at and was like, oh, look, he got exposed at Worlds, like he's Lisa in one trick, and that was the whole narrative that followed his career. Whereas like Gilius, it felt like he was kind of peaking towards the end. I mean, went to 5 games against G2. You know, like they were just looking like a solid team, and it looked like he was one of the components that like the catalyst
There's no
of the team.
external reason put that way, right? There was no reason we can guess. Like you have to just speculate for what it is, right? Until someone says.
Yeah. But I think Gilius is a really interesting example of someone who is one of those specialists that complement some of your other players, right? Like Gilius's thing has always been like sacrificing himself for his teammates and being super decisive. And like sometimes he's going to win the game. Sometimes he's going to go in and engage, and it's terrible. Like it happens sometimes, right? But sometimes he sacrifices himself like unbelievably to snowball your, I don't know, top lane Irelia matchup that Broken Blade is playing perfectly. And then it looks super good, right? So he's a great example of a specialist that fit that team really, really, really well. And he's like a super big communicator, right? And from what I know about Abadage, like I don't know the guy, but I don't think that he's like, if we categorize players as like leaders and followers very broadly, I don't think that he's a leader. Whereas Gilius, for sure, that guy's a leader, right? So that's a great example of two players that fit each other really, really, really well. And that's probably a big part of why Schalke was a really good team.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so
maybe if you were playing with a rookie mid laner, you did want Gilius. I don't know.
Yeah, true. I mean, all right, this is where we get Thorn involved because I saw him tweeting out some spicy takes on the Schalke sale. Obviously, big news in LEC is that Schalke has supposedly sold their slot for something like 25 million or something in that ballpark.
It was 26.5 million because the joke is, Dom, they are so fucking amateur hour in that team that in the official like document that was like, you know, the release of like we're selling the team, they literally took the words 26.5 million euros and made the font size bigger and capitalized it in bold. Like these guys, like this our fucking school report. What are you talking about? Dude, when would that ever happen? Like Coca-Cola announces the acquisition of Quench for a 15 points larger, $7 trillion, and then the rest of the things go back 0.12 again. Like, what fucking amateur hour shit is this? Plus, that whole thing they did the whole time of like, we don't want to sell, we just need money, which means we have to sell. So, do you want to sell then? No, but I do want the money and I will sell. So do you want to be in the league? Well, I want to be in the league, but I'm about to sell and get out. So it's like, I don't know why we had to go through that like fucking like 1984, like 2 + 2 = 5, like struggle session. But there's something about this team. I don't get the hype around Schalke, mate. They had 2 good splits, or at least they had splits where they were fun. Like they weren't even actually a team that was going to win, but they were what you'd call like the spoiler is the terminology. You know, they were there to potentially fuck someone else's tournament up, which is exciting. It's very rare you get that. I mean, in a world where it was just G2 Fnatic the whole time, the idea you could even have an outside Dark Horse team that might do something like that was pretty cool. Obviously, Mad Lions himself were playing that role like a year ago with the other lineup. My problem is this: they're not some legendary fucking League of Legends organization. They weren't even relevant until like 3 years ago or something, and even then with very different sets of players, and they haven't even really kept players over their time. Like the only player they had left who was approaching a franchise player was Opset, and he went ages ago now. So to me, it's like they were just like an okay LCS org, ULCS. You know, they actually had, if anything, I think they performed way above the expectations they should have had if you know how much money the team's got and who they could have signed. Like, that Dylan Falco guy is fucking miracle work. I don't know how he did it, mate. I know his career's weird because every time he's been on the big teams, he never seems to get the championships that he wants. But then when he gets put down again, he always seems to overperform with the players he gets. He always gets like way more out of some guy that no one's hyping, and suddenly they're in the playoffs. So I think in general, like, it was a cool story, but people are crying over this team as though it was like some like fucking, you know, hallmark of European League of Legends is going, who gives a fuck? If the team BDS has good players, I don't give a fuck, mate. It doesn't really mean much to me. I don't really know what the whole hype's about. Yeah. Just because they won 8 games in a row in summer or something. Why am I crying?
I mean, I was actually surprised that people are so upset about the Schalke thing, just because like the amount of money they're selling for. I can't imagine them not making money.
It seems like a slam dunk to do that deal. Yeah, if you bought in for how much it was, there's almost no way you haven't made loads of money. It sounds like a perfect deal for everyone. I'll even add that in, by the way. I probably should have made this point because, like I said, I actually think it's a mixture of some shrewd decision making and good coaching that's basically gotten them results. if they don't have those people in the future years, Schalke could easily have been a bottom feeder in the elite. They could be what SK is now, a team that's just gambling on random rookies, and if they're bad, they're bad. Like, I know this is like a bigger issue, so we can't really get in on this episode, but like, I know everyone thinks of the teams by how good they are in the server, but what you're supposed to do if you think about LEC is think of it as a business and how good is that company within this bigger framework of 10 teams that are joined together in Europe. If I'm picking organizations, there's loads of esports orgs I'd want in before Schalke. By the way, same would apply to Astralis, to SK. Like, I actually think, if anything, that's what I'm waiting for a few years down the line is when people really have the money to want to buy into something like this, I wonder how many of those orgs are just going to sell. Probably all, if I had to guess. They don't seem like they're in it to win and be there long term, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Schalke and you look at like their players are really good, right? They have a bunch of really good players that like were all going to run out of their contracts in the next year.
Yes.
And like if you look at like Schalke, like the football division is obviously public, right? Like you know how much money this company makes and how much it spends, and like they're screwed, right? Like they're in a really bad financial position, which is obviously why they're selling. So like. If you're Schalke, you're obviously not in a position to invest more money into League of Legends right now. Like that's never going to happen, right? So if you're Schalke and all of your good players leave you at the end of the year, like, and you're not willing to invest money to either re-sign them or to get new good players, like, yeah, you're going to suck and you're going to lose a lot of the value of your team, right? But I think that actually Schalke leaving the LEC, well, I mean, I'm sure fans will be sad, but like there will be more French fans that come anyway because the French market is way bigger and the viewership will be way better for the league. So that's a positive. But actually, like the fact that Schalke will for sure have made money on this, like financially, like a sale of 26 million, like there's no way they spent 26 million in their years in the LEC, like not even close, right? So like it's actually good because it means that other people could look at esports and be like, hey, those guys made millions. Those guys made enough money to finance their crappy football team. Sorry, based on esports.
No, they're crappy.
Maybe we should do esports, right? Like that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I mean, the place to go from here, you know, we got to talk about this. Is probably the last episode that we're gonna hit this on. Is this whole, you know, coaching topic? We're seeing all these changes, and then now we finally reached the conclusion of, I think, the Jatt saga, where Jatt has now resigned. And you know, from reading Reddit threads, I've heard that you are responsible for this solely, Thorin. You are the guy that said, Jatt, he doesn't deserve the job, and you know, you pretty much took his career away, just, you know, zapped him out of existence like Thanos. So
there was only two ways. Basically, either I am like self-made and we do just control the fabric of time. Like basically, we are like when he got that fucking one where he's like, reality can be anything I want it to be. That's apparently ours just in life. Or it's the other one, Dom, which is the amount of comments of people just like, look, can we all just agree Thorin had nothing to do with this whatsoever? It's like, why are you bringing it up then in a thread that's just like, you know, Jatt resigns from Team Liquid? Like, so like, basically what people don't realize in that story is obviously the real truth is like neither. Like realistically, what happened was, I do think getting the information out in the way I got the information out, and the fact that like basically you would have to have been, put it this way, you would have to be incredibly unprofessional and I'd even say unethical as a human being to publicize that information if it wasn't legit. So I would say the fact that I can sort of put my reputation behind it probably did help. Like, I don't know if the same information got out through like an anonymous source or through like some smaller journalists, if it would have had as big an impact. But in my opinion, what really got Jatt fired, if indeed he was fired and didn't choose to resign, which would seem rather weird to do. But let's imagine he was fired or told, we've reached an impasse. I would say it's actually what happened between him and the players that was the bigger issue. I think what I did is just help bring it to a head. Because essentially, like, those things were all known behind the scenes by the people in that circle. But I don't think they'd ever had to actually have sort of like an intervention type moment of like, look, this can't continue. I think people still naively were thinking things like, oh, he'll just apologize in a few weeks and, you know, you'll bring him back in. Like, one of those things. So, like, in my opinion, if you knew, like, some of the behind-the-scenes stories, it was, like, just a complete impasse. Like, there was a whole bunch of people who just could not work with certain other individuals, and it just was never going to happen. So, in my opinion, that's why I thought this just shows how, like, popular Jatt was actually as a figure. I saw a lot of comments that were even people like, I'm a Team Liquid fan, this is so depressing, which to me is like, look, if you know the behind the scenes, this is basically the best outcome for everyone. Like, if Jatt indeed is a really good coach, he can go to a different team now where players aren't mutinying against him. If the players really thought he wasn't doing a good job as a coach, they claim that Cold, obviously the former jungler of Origin, they claim he was like the coach they believed in anyway, so they get the chance to show if they're full of shit or not. And at the end of the year, Team LEC could potentially keep some of their best players. So even though in the short term it's definitely a loss for Jatt, it could potentially be a win for everyone, in my opinion, if it's handled properly. Like, I think this is the right outcome, put it out there.
I mean, the other thing that's worth mentioning, and I'm not saying this was the case in Team LEC, but I have no idea, right? But like, we are in an industry which is run by mostly 20-something-year-olds who are then reporting to mostly like big corporate companies, venture capitalists, people like this, right? And like, there's this enormous gap in not only like qualification, but just like the world that these people live in, right? So very often there's like this huge like just lack of communication that one side understands, right? And very often you find that owners and CEOs and people like that have no idea what's happening in their own teams. So like, and then suddenly something shines a light on it, and then they're like, well, we'd better change this because this looks really bad on us, or because it is really bad, right? So I mean, it's not entirely impossible that something like that happen. I have no idea how involved Steve Aronset is in Liquid. I imagine quite, but I don't know. With like a company that big, with like that big revenues and like that many massive sponsorships and like their expenditure, maybe he doesn't have time to be involved in League of Legends. So maybe he doesn't know what's happening inside the team all the time, right? Probably not. So yeah, like it's really easy for that to happen.
Basically, the problem I found was this, right? Which is, as you say, especially owners, it's quite rare actually. Like LCS is quite unique in this sense in the world of esports. The idea that people like Jack and Reggie are like on the ground each day with the team, like that's actually really bizarre. It's mainly because they come from League of Legends themselves. So it's sort of like they're the equivalent of like when Jerry Jones, the NFL owner, obviously he interrupts with the coaching staff because he's just playing a vanity project called It's My Team. So, you know, like he's explicitly not trying to, exactly. But basically, like most of them, I agree. What they tend to do is just have one or two people, like a veteran player or the coach. Well, that's the problem in this case, as far as I can tell, Mac, is that as far as I can tell, I think Steve Arneset's guy was Jatt. So it's like, Jatt isn't going to be reporting on himself like, yeah, by the way, Steve, the players aren't really fucking with the coach. Like, so I imagine that was his issue. Like, it's just eventually he was like, oh, I was not find out any problems were going on. It's because, well, you know, what was the bottleneck on this one, mate? You can figure that out.
These players hate me. The players wanted me to tell you that I should probably be fired, just so you're aware.
I mean, I think the situation that's interesting is that normally there have been issues within teams, and normally because the org is the person that it's like chosen the coach, they end up automatically siding with management because they want to believe that like the people that they hired to do the job are like the more mature individuals in the situation, or like those are the people that are qualified to like manage the team. So I think the most shocking thing to me is that they actually ended up the most shocking thing to me was that Jatt ended up resigning. That's what I should say. So normally that's not the resolution that we have mid-season. Like I think normally, like if the results are bad, then the coach will normally get canned. But mid-season, having a coach resign, I feel like that's relatively unheard of, especially on like such a winning team. I don't think we've seen it yet in esports with pretty much any team. Like it's like if Grabs got fired this week, it'd be like, what the fuck? Like how is this even possible? So I think that's like the most interesting part. Speaking of NA coaches, we know that you've obviously worked a lot with Peter Dunn. He is currently in NA. He is bringing up rookies, and you've been talking a lot about your approach towards developing rookies and the ideas that you have around finding people that have different specializations and complementing each other within that. So how much of this approach actually did come from Peter, and how much of this was, something that you've always felt passionate about?
A lot. Like it's not necessarily directly copied from Peter, although we are very similar. Like as people, Peter and I are actually quite similar, and we have quite similar philosophies in terms of the way that we like talk to people, the way that we relate to people, the way we build teams. But just the idea that as a coach, you should have a roster building philosophy is something that came from Peter, right? And he's the person that actually pushed me to start like learning all of this stuff, right? Like if you ask Peter about like, I don't know, the like 1975 Tottenham Hotspurs, he'll be able to probably tell you everything about their coach and like what their philosophy was and how they like built their rosters and why that was or wasn't successful and all that type of stuff, right? And that's something that I took a lot from him. So he was there very much the one that drove me to like actually go and study coaching as an abstract, right? Like read about coaches and managers and stuff like that from other sports. Managers is a great topic actually. Going back to what we were previously saying about communication and stuff like that within esports is that like obviously when there's a big it's going a bit off topic, but I find it interesting. So
don't worry about that. That's
like,
all part of the show, mate.
That's the whole point of the show.
yeah. Like when you have big like these like massive problems inside a team, and like everyone has their piece on what they want to say about like what's going wrong, whose fault it is, who's causing the problems, where's the tension coming from, right? Like what people I think often don't understand in esports is like how unbelievably short term a position and how like kind of how dissimilar a position an esports manager, like a team manager, is to a manager in conventional sports, right? Because obviously in like in European conventional sports, we like the manager is like the guy at the head of the whole project, right? Like he sells the players, he signs them, he negotiates with them, like, and obviously like esports managers do that to a certain degree, but very few esports managers actually have like real decision making power. Usually this is like someone who just really likes esports and is not qualified in like a corporate sense or a business sense, and like is good at logistics and really hardworking because it's a really hard position, right? But they're not someone who actually has that much expertise when it comes to like League of Legends or people management or psychology or team building or anything like this, right? So very often you get like managers then going and reporting to owners or coaches or talking to players or whatever it is and saying stuff that's like super unhelpful or wrong or conflicting or stuff like that, because everyone wants to have their say, right? And the manager always has their say on like, you know, what is going wrong. Thankfully, that's not the case in Mad Lions. We have actually really qualified managers, but I think the number of like people who are lacking a lot of expertise in the esports manager, like team manager position especially, is like crazy. And people really overestimate how much expertise and decision-making power those guys have. So that's like another big complicating factor for the whole picture when you have internal issues in a team.
Yeah. So like when you were going to start like, you know, developing your own coaching philosophy, like where did you even begin? Because there's so many different books that are written by so many different people. You know, like did you have like an idea of what you envisioned a League of Legends team to be, and like, you know, what your goal within that team would be, or like how did you even start that whole process of like learning, you know, learning your own, I guess, identity as a coach?
Sure. So, I mean, the whole specialist thing was something that Peter very much believes in as well. So that's something that we've spoken about a lot. Like we have slight differences in opinion, but for the most part, we align on that philosophy. But like in terms of actually kind of like finding what I wanted from a League of Legends team and the players I wanted to work with and stuff like that, like Peter and I are really different in terms of the players that we like working with. So like going from Splice 2019 into Mad Lions 2020, the big thing that I wanted was like, and I've always been like this as a coach, so Splice was really hard for me actually, was I want aggressive players. I want people who will be demanding, who will be aggressive, who will be decisive, who will be loud, even difficult to work with, right? But will have like super strong opinions and will commit to them hard and make other people like commit to them hard as well, right? And that's one of the good things about Humanoid and Elioya, for example. Those guys are really good at that. So that was a big like philosophy 180 almost from Splice to Mad Lions, was finding players that are like, okay, this guy's young, he's cocky, he's aggressive, and like very much changing the identity of the team. That was probably the biggest change from Splice to Mad, and from like Peter to me. Whereas Peter was a lot more rounded with the players that he wanted to work with. But he's very much a long-term planner. I think Peter was actually one of the only coaches around that signed for 3 years. Like when he came on to Splice, he was like, right, like 3 years is how long I need to actually build you a good team and build you a good staff, and then eventually I will like hand it over to someone else, and by then you will have something sustainable, right? I think actually back then he was like the only coach that signed anywhere for 3 years, which is yeah, that's been a big influence on me as well in like actually thinking long term.
Yeah, I mean,
let me ask you about oh sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Right, basically, I wanted to actually ask about a specific player there that while you were talking, I was thinking about, which is, since you said you want like players that are like aggressive, like decisive, can even be loud, have big opinions, you know, like basically, like as you said earlier, you don't mind if they make mistakes, like go for it basically, and then we'll figure it out afterwards. How do you deal with kha'zix then? Because this is someone where when he was first coming into Mad Lions, I was basically told like this guy, if he actually succeeds, will be like forgiven. Basically, he'll be like one of the strongest AD carries in the whole league, like a super skilled player. But I've noticed actually of all the players in the team, he's someone who looks like he's had massive ups and downs. Like he had times where he was arguably the best AD carry. I think the reason I was thinking of him was I wondered psychologically how you deal with a player like that, because as I say, the skill ceiling's supposed to be so high that one day he's supposed to probably be the best Mad Lions player. But when I look at the last split, dude, if you had lost that final, I tell you right now, his career narrative would be very different. Every fan would be trying to say he was like a choker, that he'd blown the final. Like, you could, I know because he would, it kind of doesn't really matter now. Like, people don't think about it too much. But like, there's an example of a player where you never know. Those are the moments that can like to make you take a harsh turn in your career. So how has it been to deal with this player?
Yeah, I mean, Kha'Zix is very polarizing. People either like love him or think that like he does a lot of silly stuff, which sometimes he does, right? I mean, Kha'Zix's like first of all, he's a wonderful player to work with. Like I love working with Kha'Zix. I find it really easy to work with, and I think he's a player that naturally like fits my coaching style quite well, because I'm all about like not caring about making mistakes, reassuring people and stuff like that. So with players that are very emotional, and Kha'Zix is a very emotionally open person, like you should always expect a degree of inconsistency, right? That's like normal. But that's also something which tends to fade with time. Like if you look at a player like Perks when he first came into the LCS, like I think Kha'Zix is actually not dissimilar from Perks in that regard. In that like Perks, I mean, still does right have games where it looks really bad.
He just runs it down.
Yeah, but like actually when like for a player to have done that, to be able to transition to the ADC role, which is the most punishing role for that exact thing, for like being inconsistent and being over aggressive and having positioning mistakes, shows that like I think Perks' maturity level and his aggression toned down significantly over the course of a few years, and he became like this incredibly cerebral player, like this really, really smart, calculated player. And I think Kha'Zix has a lot of those hallmarks as well. So I mean, when it comes to like actually like the day-to-day of what that looks like, of dealing with an individual who is like plateauing and troughing, right? Like if you look at Kha'Zix at MSI was insane, like insane. One of the only ADCs, like Western ADCs, that I've seen consistently get the better of Eastern bot lanes, like ever. At least that like I've worked with or worked around, like in close proximity to.
Took Ghost job. You know, that guy is riding the bench ever since Kha'Zix, you know, had his last laugh. So definitely good.
Yeah. Shawn Michaels like, look, I'll fucking do it then. Get out my way. You take my role.
Yeah, no, that's literally what Domline looks like. They're like, we will do fucking anything to not play with this guy. Like, I'll play this role. Can you like anything to get this guy off the fucking team? I'm tired of seeing this shit. So, I mean, it's pretty crazy. The results. I don't know. I guess Kha'Zix is just a career ender. But yeah, continue with your point.
But yeah, so the variance is going to be high with a player who's like young and emotional and super aggressive, right? Like that's part of the price that you pay for someone who's really talented and talks a lot and it's really nice to work with, which is completely fine. But like when it comes to actually how you as a coach support that individual player, I put a lot of value on figuring out like how that person actually likes to receive like warmth and affection, and like do they like, you know, when they're feeling bad or when they're feeling good as well, like do they want to celebrate or commiserate by like having a hug? Do they want to be told that they did a good job? Do they want you to tell them that you're proud of them or that they played this matchup particularly well, or like do they want you to make it all about like this in game did well and you improved on this and this and this and this, right? Like, so I think a lot of it is just about learning what that person actually appreciates and what they value the most, because like different people have different ones, and it's something that I've actually come to appreciate a lot more this year, is that people want to be loved in the way that they like to give love, right? So if you notice that someone like always hugs people, then they probably also want to be given affection physically, right? If they always compliment people when they like, you know, actually appreciate someone, they probably want to be complimented, and if they're always complimenting people, then maybe they're not that comfortable with being hugged, and stuff like that, right? I know this sounds very airy-fairy and very hippie now.
This actually seems to be something that's in the zeitgeist, mate, because I've actually heard women describe something in a similar time frame you all talk about, the last 6 months, and they describe it as like it's your love language. Like you have to see basically how people communicate love. Yeah, and then the premise is, as you say, like you can sort of get the hint for what they probably want about how they're treating other people. The thing is, it's one of those things that people might think is like just nothing, but actually, if you haven't observed something, and probably most of us don't pay attention to that sort of thing, could be pretty eye-opening.
I think it's actually been really helpful for some of our staff, and for me to our staff to talk about, okay, this guy, this is how he wants reassurance, right? And part of that whole culture that we try to set of, I don't care if you make a mistake, comes with that, like with that, like if you can pair that with a way of showing that person that you still appreciate them and that you still care about them and that you don't mind, with that they particularly appreciate, then that becomes a really powerful message, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I was going to ask you based off this is, we see a lot of players that come into NA with a similar mentality. They're super aggressive. They're like borderline cocky. And it feels like for some reason, like when this happens to an NA player, if they ever when they have that downswing, which is inevitable, and they just fucking monster into weak, they completely shut down and they just never look like the same player again. I mean, this is kind of extreme. It's not always to this degree, but we see like a definite shutdown with players that have this type of tendency in North America. Why do you think it is that in Europe, players seem to not really give a fuck? Like they just kind of brush it off and end up, like Kha'zix didn't mind if finals went poorly. He just went to MSI and, performed as one of the best ADs.
I'm not sure how directly linked it is, but I think for a lot of coaches that I have seen work or worked with, and this is something that I particularly dislike, is that I hate the idea of correct by the book League of Legends, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. I know a lot of teams and coaches will have these massive lists of things that are okay, every time we reset, we're going to come out of base. And step 1, we're going to talk about tempo. Step 2, we're going to talk about what wave we're going to contest. Step 3, we're going to talk about what vision. Step 4, we're going to talk about how we want to team fight, right? And they give these players these massive checklists of
this is something TSM is famous for this.
The book
telling
bullshit. Yeah, I hate it.
Exactly what your jungle pathing should be in certain games based on which lanes you have prio and all this stuff. So yeah, continue with your point, but that's something that's very integral to American League of Legends.
I absolutely hate it, and I think there is nothing that you can do apart from literally screaming at a 17-year-old kid and kind of mentally abusing them that will actually degrade a player's ability to be aggressive and decisive and confident more than that. I think it's just awful. So that's something that I particularly dislike and something that we avoid. And most of what we do at MAD is about training fundamentals and giving players agency to make decisions in key moments, right? And saying that okay, you've seen this pattern 50 times, you know what the general abstract response is in this moment. And this is why I think that League of Legends by the book doesn't work, is because chess by the book works because your pieces are worth the same every single game. League of Legends pieces differ in value according to what champion you're playing, right? If you are always thinking that you must contest this mid wave as 4 people, well, you're going to do it as 4 people when you have an Ezreal that's completely fucking invulnerable and cannot die even if 4 people walk up to him and he can just get the prio alone. So you're going to do things that are just bad because your champions are not worth the same every single game. And I think that's at least from what I've seen of certain coaches working with certain players, I think that massively guts their ability to be creative and to be decisive and to be confident, especially with a player that's very instinctive, because you have different players that learn different ways, right? You have players who learn by doing, you have players who learn by watching, players who learn by explanations, whatever it happens to be, right? And if you have a player who is a really creative player that is not particularly good at understanding abstract systems, right? Some players, for example, if you stand up and do a diagram on the board of if you push this wave, then you'll be able to move here and then this will happen, blah blah blah, they're over their head completely, and that's fine because they learn in that way. And for those type of players particularly, I think that type of system is terrible, because those are the types of players that tend to be creative and tend to see windows where other people don't. So generally what we work with is trying to get people to put them in the right place at the right time broadly. Okay, when your enemy does this, generally speaking, you should do this, but it changes depending on your champion. But generally speaking, these are the core fundamentals of League of Legends, is that this is how strong side, weak side works. This is how tempo works, whatever it is. And we just drill fundamentals really, really hard. And then your players have agency to make room within the system for their own plays, because they are playing Ezreal or they're playing Lee Sin and they can get into the fight and get out, whatever.
If I had to guess one of the reasons, because obviously we are painted with the broadest push possible. We're talking about an entire region. But if I had to guess from seeing a lot of those like documentary reality TV shows that they've done about a lot of the teams in the LCS, I think part of it actually is like a byproduct of the way they seem to process the game. Because I don't know how many teams still do it now, but it used to be classic that they would do like a review of the game right after the fucking game was just played. And then they would all sit down right after they came out of an LCS game and start watching the game back with the coaches, or do it the very next day. And then when they're talking, right, they would do it all as a group, Mac. And it would be in this scenario where when they pause, by the way, probably the best role for this is jungler. If you think about it, they were talking about players that come in, you know, decisive, exciting, and then they just go into their fucking shell and they just become a bot, basically, who just does what everyone tells them. Well, you can imagine what it's like to be shamed in front of the entire team, where it's like, pause, look what you did wrong here. And by the way, at this point, because you're not interacting with people, they can all just sit back. They might be fucking somewhat up on some mind level, but they just get to sit back and judge you. And also, even if you don't say it explicitly, it does almost create a vibe of like, if we do reviews in that way, where we're just all looking at everything and then we're pausing on each individual thing, you can feel like it's a linear thing. And it's like, right, whoever did the last mistake, that's what killed us. You cost us the game. Whereas like, I think that's a terrible way to coach people generally, like especially certain personality types. There's even personality types where even if it was explicitly only their fault, you'd never want to do it in that setting. Like one of the things I heard from behind the scenes that Youngbok used to do when he was in Fnatic, and if you've ever seen him on talk shows, by the way, he is so good at playing defense for a player, but without lying and saying they're way better than they actually are, and, you know, like just fucking misleading you, basically. He'll tell you the truth of what their flaws and strengths are, but in a way where he uses euphemisms, and the way he'll like set up the context won't make it seem as bad. So what he would do, I heard in his teams, was he wouldn't ever be like, now, Broxy, you obviously fucked up this wave, like when he came, like you didn't understand. What he'd do instead is he'd just say, like guys, in this early part of the game, like we didn't do something right with how we set up like the jungle in general. Like the lanes maybe didn't communicate at this point, and like it seems like there was and he would just do it in a way which almost like took the personalities out of it, and it became like we're all part of a team trying to solve a little problem here with the pieces we've got. Like to me, that mentality is going to have a way better chance of succeeding and overcoming problems. The other one, I think, it just gets what the end result will be, which is the people who got sort of like publicly shamed enough are going to feel ashamed of doing it. They're going to second guess themselves and not go for certain moves, and they're probably just going to play just like a bad version of a safe game. Because I've always said my problem in NA isn't at all the Clown Fiestas. I hate the games where two teams set up for a dragon fight,
and then
the one that has no positioning just stands there going like this for 30 seconds and then walks away without taking the dragon. Like, what is that? Like, dude, that you're not like. It's one thing if you make a bad decision when you play League of Legends. That person and that team isn't even playing League of Legends. They're watching someone else win a game of League of Legends where it's PvE. Like, what even is that? So, in my opinion, this is actually like a mad decisive aspect, because if you take away someone's like intuition, their sense that like they might have an idea of what's right to do right now in the game, and even worse, as you're saying, Mac, you make it almost as though there was like a script that they're supposed to follow, you're going to destroy all the creativity a player has.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said about like making reviews cooperative, right? Like that, like a bad review is a massive list of mistakes. That's a bad review where the coach is the only person talking, and they're saying, here's mistake number 1, you messed up this. Here's mistake number 2, you messed up this. Especially if it's execution. Like, I cannot stand it when coaches talk about execution. Like, yes, you know that you missed your cue. Like,
yes, exactly.
Stop talking about it.
Does this sound familiar at all, Thorin, or just, you know, this is just some random concept? I mean,
but yeah, and like, you know, if you can take the personalities and take the egos out of the game and make it about, this was really good, what should we have done differently? Then you start like this was really good, it went south here. At this point, like, this is where like things went wrong. Like, even if you as the coach know the answer, or think you know the answer, which sometimes you don't because you could be wrong, then, you know, what is the, like, what do we do from here? What do you guys think? Here, I'm not sure about this. Like, where should we be going now? When we see this guy show on this ward, what should our response be? And then it becomes cooperative. And then it becomes really easy to give other people feedback of being like, actually, I think instead of being like, you are wrong, you are in the wrong place, you are inting, being like, oh, I think it would be way better if you went bot side here, because then we would get this tower, blah, 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 right? And I think that's something that I try to cultivate a lot. And I'm quite lucky as well in that I have players who don't care. Like, this is something that I've said a lot about Armut. Like, Armut's confidence to take feedback is unlike any player I have ever seen in my life. Like, it's insane, to the point where like he can mess up his laning phase super badly in a scrim, and then like we could in front of 5 people, like, because like, and I've checked, and I thought that this was like not okay, and I was like, dude, like, do you want to like us to not do this in front of people? So, okay. I don't care at all. Like, you could go through his laning phase, like auto attack by auto attack in front of 5 people with the whole team being like, you fucked up that one, you fucked up that last hit, you shouldn't have auto attacked that minion. Now the wave is too pushed or whatever it is, right? His capacity for that is incredible. So we're quite lucky with the players that we have in that regard. And like you mentioned, like doing reviews after the games immediately. Some players want that, some players don't. Some players it's a terrible idea because they just want to be alone because they messed up and they know it. But our players all want that. Our players all want to sit down after the game and know exactly what went wrong. They want to like find the right answer. And there's very rarely bad blood about it, which is, I think, a sign of a really healthy atmosphere. But Arma especially, like, will be like.
Oh no, we had him on the show. He was one of the most, like, I guess, like he had the best, like, I don't know what to even call it. Like, he had some like self-realization that's really uncommon.
He wasn't delusional, basically. Yeah. Like, put it this way, he basically not only like took all the joke. Like you see, like Rogue lost it. He also sort of agreed, like, yeah, I was playing like shit in most of the final. Like he was like mad realistic compared to what you expect like a pro to be like, especially if they just won the championship in like rookie split or whatever, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, he straight up told us that he like wasn't a great laner. He's like, yeah, I'm not a great laner. I think BB's a better laner than me. Wonder's a better laner than me. Bwipo's a better laner than me. It was like, god damn, like how do you have like how do you not just ego on the world when you just come into a team that's not even supposed to win as a rookie and then you actually win a championship? Like I feel like most players would be over the moon at that point.
Yeah, it's crazy, and there's like a quality that I really admire in people that I have had to try to cultivate a lot in myself because I struggle with it, is being able to say, I don't know, or I don't understand. Can you explain that again? And like not being afraid of looking stupid in front of people, right? That's something that like I think is actually an insane quality, and Arma is really good at that as well, right? He could just be like, I don't get it, explain it again. I don't get it, explain it again, until he gets it. And then when he gets it, it's fine, right? But that's something that I struggle with a lot personally, actually. I think most people do as well.
Oh, yeah. I
mean, like being in front of a group of people and being like, I don't understand that word. What does that mean? Like, no one does that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, what I would ask is, like, do you ever feel like as a coach, you know, you shouldn't be doing that? Because I know a lot of coaches behind the scenes in North America feel kind of like they should have the answers. Like, they shouldn't be telling their players they don't know something because it, like, I kind of, like, undermines their authority, and then like the players just kind of think that they're an idiot or like they're just like not useful. Like how do you how do you still maintain your status as a coach while also like, you know, being able to be honest with what you don't know?
I think that shows a lot of strength as a person, actually. And like my job in this team is not to be like a mastermind 9,000 IQ, understand the game better than all of my players, right? Like if I were that good at League of Legends, then why am I not a pro player? There's a reason I'm not a pro player, because my ability to calculate like all of these various situations, like my ability to recognize patterns in the map and what that means, my ability to understand how quickly a champion travels from point A to point B and the range of specific spells like involved in that, like it's not as good as my players, right? Like why would I think that it is? I would have to be like the most unbelievably arrogant person to think that I know better than all 5 of them put together. Like even like when you compare to one of my players, right? But like when I compare to like all 5 of them putting their heads together, why on earth would I A, think that that's even the case, or B, choose to try to do that alone, like choose to put that burden of responsibility on myself to always be right? Because if you start with that model and you insist that the coach is always right and that I am always right, well, the first time I mess up, then I do lose respect. But if I admit, like, then I do lose the respect of my players because I'm trying to force ideas on them that are just wrong because they can understand the situation better than me, right? But if that's like, if I start from the premise that I'm like, that my strength here and my job with you guys is to make you be on the same page, understand abstract concepts, think of things in big pictures, and make sure that we have a global understanding and make sure that we're doing certain tasks like sitting down and talking about draft and what like this champion is good at, right? Like my ADC who like doesn't talk about matchups that much, for example. Not that that's the case with kha'zix, but like, for example, to make sure that my ADC tells my jungler that, I don't know, my champion feels really hard to play into engaged champions or whatever it is, right? Like that's my job, is to facilitate them and to make sure that they are looking at the big picture of things, because as like their nature as pro players should be to be really specialized on their one and really like tunnel visioned on their own specific role, right? So like it's much more about guiding them to the right answers and facilitating the correct discussions and sometimes teaching them things, of course. Like there will be concepts they don't understand or bad habits that they have, or whatever it is that need to be addressed, right? But like if a player like like if a player like Humanoid, who's now been with me for 2.5 years, doesn't already know everything that I know and more, then either I'm shit or he's shit. Like that's the only conclusion you can come to, right? So like it would be ridiculous of me to think that I like can understand the League of Legends situation better than Humanoid, right? Because in theory, this is a person who's way more talented than I am, who's also had the benefit of 2.5 years of coaching, not only of me, but also of Peter Dunn, right? So like, why would I why would I possibly think that I could understand any given situation better than him, right?
Yep, definitely. So one of the players we didn't hit on yet that you coached, we brought him up a lot last year on the Crackdown. There was a whole conversation.
I claim for the end of you. I see where this is going. Come on.
Yep. We got to do it. We got to do it. Everyone knows where this is going. So everyone was doing the debate, Orome or Alfari. We had a bunch of people, including Peter Dunn, Kaiser, Karzi. We had a ton of people from your team on the show, and they pretty much made him out to be like an irreplaceable part of the lineup. Like he fulfilled a job as a weak side top laner that no one else could do, and like he needed to stay. And right after Worlds, the first thing we see is like Bad Lions just kicks Orome and then instantly takes Armut from the team that beat him. So I mean, what was like the role of Orome in the team, and why did you guys end up going through with the change with him being such a great weak side top laner?
Yeah, I can see the what's the word? I can see the contradiction for sure. I can understand. So Arome's role were like, I mean, he was definitely a specialist, right? Like he was a big specialist, and he was really, really good at like taking flak for the team, right? Like he would always be willing to sacrifice in draft or in game or whatever it happened to be. Yeah, for sure. And he was also an extremely, extremely good teammate. And that's something that I think is really underrated, which I don't know Alfari, but to be honest with you, I highly doubt that he is a more supportive teammate than Orome, because you don't find those very often, like more supportive teammates than Orome. I highly doubt it. And this is a roster with 4 rookie players. And for those players, for like the atmosphere and the support and like the mental stability and like the emotional help that he gave a lot of the players on the roster, actually, I think it's really hard to underestimate the impact of that. And that's, for example, why Kha'Zix was so like outwardly vocal about the fact that Orome was super, super necessary for the team, because that's something that Orome helped Kha'Zix with like a lot, was that they were really, really close. They still are really close. And yeah, on the flip side, why did we change him? I mean, Aroma's been like very like honest about this on social media himself now, so I guess I can comment on it. Was that like he just really struggled, like he really, really struggled mentally. And like when like after we finished at Worlds, like the first thing he wanted to do was come and talk to me, and like basically he already knew that like he shouldn't continue playing with the team, and that he didn't even think that he wanted to necessarily. Although I mean, I think he probably would have stayed, like if we'd said no, like we really want you to stay. But I think he knew that it wasn't a good idea. And I think, and he was very realistic about the fact that he wasn't coping mentally, and that he had a lot of work to do on himself, and that he needed time for that, and he couldn't do that under like the conditions of playing in LEC, right? Which is probably why you haven't seen him in LEC yet, because he's been dumpstering in regional leagues. Actually, he's been really good in regional leagues.
Yep. Made the final of the Masters.
Yeah. So that was definitely the big part about Orome. But like in his defense, he's a wonderful, wonderful person and a really good teammate. And he gave us the exact niche that we needed for that team, right? He was a fantastic weak side top laner. Like I think people forget, like again, like there's a recency bias, right? Because at Worlds he had a really tough time. But people forget that like the BO5 that we won against G2 was with us giving them Kalista, which had been permabanned against them for like 20 games. I mean, I'm probably exaggerating, but like permaban against them for like the entirety of the last 2 patches, I think, because no one could play into it. And we gave them Kalista first pick in order to get something else for one of our other players, and gave Orome Maokai. Like he played Maokai into Kalista on top lane, and he survived, and we won, right? Like that's how we beat G2 for the first time ever. And he deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we didn't have the opinion that he was like super shit or he shouldn't have been in LEC on this show. We just said that pretty much we didn't think that he was at the level of being on like a top 3 team in LEC. Like he wasn't the same quality of player. And look, when you think about those teams, right, you look at the top 4 from that split, you had Alfari, Wonder, and Bwipo. And it's like, who's the odd man out here when it comes to like, you know, laning in top lane. So it's not like we had this really extreme opinion about him.
The meta shifted really badly in Worlds as well. Like the meta was terrible at Worlds.
I'll also throw this in there. To be fair, Finn got exactly the same treatment, just from the opposite playing style. Like his whole perspective was he can only play the carries in the top lane. Wouldn't they be better with Odoamne? Like it was like Alfari for your team, Odoamne for the, and as you said, like obviously those are the obvious people you'd try and upgrade with on paper, wouldn't you? So it wasn't even actually like a massive diss on those players. It wasn't like the Broxer thing where everyone was like, "How was he in this team?" So it's more like, couldn't the team be better? Basically, the contrast there, by the way, wasn't even about, again, the players. It's about how coaches see the players they are working with. Because from the outside, we're just doing like Football Manager, you know, we're just trying to get a better player so the result's better. But from the inside, you obviously, maybe you have a different perspective on what this guy does or how he communicates. Or, as you say, the area you can never tell about is maybe they have an element that actually boosts another player's morale or feeling in the game, which you can obviously, there's no way to measure that from outside.
Yeah, I mean, like with the Orome and Shadow, could we have been a top 4, maybe top 3 team again? I mean, perhaps not with like Rogue making changes and getting better, but like, could we have been a top 4 team? Yeah, for sure. Like, absolutely, we would have been a top 4 team in the league, but like, we couldn't have been a top 1 team. So,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing that most people still haven't like really came to terms with is that you guys are a top 1 team. You know, like people still in their mind will tell you like, oh, well, they expect G2 to like come back to form at some point. When you just look at like the raw roster, I guess for a final topic, let's hit on that a little bit. From the outside looking in, why do you think G2 is struggling so much with like a roster that on paper should be so insane?
I felt like they had a lot of really weird ideas about like what they were playing last split, like and like people will be like, ha Grabs flame, ha, which is obviously stupid because like do you think Grabs is coming in and being like, you're playing Karma today? Obviously not. But I think that they had a lot of conflicting ideas about what they wanted to play and what style they wanted to have, which hurt them a lot. I think the meta was particularly bad for Jankos in the jungle. And I think he struggled a lot because of that. In a way that like no one has exposed that weakness, because I think Jankos is actually like his specialism is sacrificing for his lanes. That's what he's good at. He's good at ganking and finding creative paths and running around wards and being annoying, and like diving you on a stacked wave. Like his understanding of waves is really good, but his understanding of how to play the game when it's like a pure jungle pathing Nirvana meta, I think is not like as good as someone like Southmaids or El Yoyos, for example. And I think that weakness was exposed in Jankos a bit last split. But yeah, like for example, if like coming back to draft, if you look at like their final draft against Rogue in spring playoffs, like the final game they played, like that draft was just completely unplayable. Like they didn't win early, they didn't have any engage, they didn't outscale, they couldn't split push. Like it was weird. It was really horrible. Yeah, and like that's a team thing, right? I think they're drafting in a much different way this split, though. Actually, I think they're actually evolving quite significantly. So
with
I think
Pantheon
that's really good
Tarek?
for the league.
Is that the evolution? No, obviously joking.
I hope not. But yeah. I think they're doing a lot better this split. I think the way they've started playing early game really differently, which I think is a good thing overall for the league, right? I think they've started actually copying some of the things that Asian teams do well in the early game, so should be good for them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
also jungle meta changed.
Yeah, no, that's what I was just going to bring up. So the jungle meta has changed, but we've still seen some like rough games from Jankos. Like ideally, I would think that this would be more of what you stated, right? Like you have more freedom in this meta to not full clear every game, and you have more freedom to gank a lane or sacrifice a camp. Like, why do you think that Jankos has still been struggling with this meta shift?
Good question. I think a lot of what has like been a problem for G2 historically as well is that they've had like really, really high resource players in a lot of cases, right? That was the case with the old G2, right? Where you had like Caps, Perks, Wunder, who were all super high resource players. Like back then, Wunder basically only played carries. Like he didn't play tanks very often. So you have like a ton of people who are being really demanding all the time, and Caps who's always willing to roam, and then suddenly it works, right? But I think actually, if you look at like the way that Reckless has historically played, it's usually been picking a scaling ADC and then having better wave control than his opponent. And that's maybe not something that synergizes that well with Jankos. And then they didn't put Wunder on carries, but I mean, maybe they just don't have as many voices demanding like ganks on certain waves in the early game, right? Maybe the like commanding voice just isn't there, and then that makes Jankos look a lot worse, right? I mean, I said that Jankos has really great understanding of waves. Maybe he doesn't, right? And this is what Thorin was hitting on earlier about like hiding another person's weakness with your strengths. Maybe Jankos doesn't actually understand waves very well, like theoretically. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's possible that he just doesn't understand it. But he always had someone to tell him where to be, on which wave to be, right? And maybe someone isn't doing that anymore, right? So that's like always a concern with early game comms, especially when it comes to like jungle mid synergy or whatever it happens to be.
Definitely. All right. So
do you have any angle on that, Dom? Why do you think G2's not that good?
I mean, I just think that overall, like the players just lost like the passion or like the fire or something. Like I always had this feeling with G2 before when they were losing, it always felt like they were still going to win. Like they would always be trying to like suicide split, or they would get pressure on a side wave and like turn that into something. Like they would always find like an angle to try to like push the game forward. And, you know, they would, if teams didn't respond perfectly to it, then they would just open up their own windows, and that would like allow for comeback plays and things like that. Now it just feels like when G2 is losing, they just lose. And like the whole excuse of like, oh, well, it's because Dragon Soul exists now. And, you know, they were like a 1-3-1 team before. They're never a great team fighting team. The reason why they're losing is because Dragon Soul, I don't really buy it, because I looked last year and it felt like even, you know, versus series, versus Mad Lions in spring, when they were literally losing, they were down like 20 kills or something, and they're still split pushing bot with Ziggs, and they're like almost taking the Nexus. It's like something about their mentality towards winning, I feel like, isn't there anymore. And I don't know how much of that is like the perks factor. I don't know how much of that is just the fact that they have been losing, actually like fucking with their heads. But definitely it seems like they are much more like okay losing than they used to be, like at least in terms of like how they play in game. What do you think, Thorin?
I think the perks factor is a lot, actually. I think perks is like a super creative and super smart player. And I think that's a huge factor. He's like obviously again a player who will lead rather than follow.
Sure. I think it's across the board. It's a bit of everything. Like, first of all, I think some of the players definitely played well. Like, in my opinion, Wunder has been pretty crap most of this year. It's been
for his standards, sure.
I really thought for real, right? With perk scores and Reckless players, funnily enough, exactly as expected, like the more classic Reckless style. I was like, dude, Wunder, this is your time, mate. If you want to fucking carry a whole bunch of lanes, then you're gonna get your picks. The problem is he's fucking hinted half the games, and then it's not even that I think Caps has been bad. It's that everyone expects Caps. It's like simple in CS:GO. You're supposed to just be the best every single game, single game, and he has not been the best mid laner every single game. Some reason he isn't even the best mid laner in the server. Like, he's good, but he isn't, like, he's not 1v9 in games. He's not dominating like everyone thought he would. So they're actually more like a normal team. Now, I actually do think it's quite mad what you say there about, like, because that is the excuse they keep saying, like, yeah, but we were never that good of like a team fighting team anyway. You just fucking signed Reckless, for fuck's sake. Like, you're one of the only teams that can't make that excuse. You have the pieces to be any kind of team. You might not be the absolute best you could possibly be in that style, like any meta, but the idea with these players, you couldn't make a good team fighting team. In that case, a lot of people need to get fired, players and fucking coaches. Give me a break.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is that, like, Reckless, like, I don't necessarily even agree that he has to be a passive AD, right? Like, last year in Fnatic, he was one of the most aggressive ADs, and I mean, maybe some of that came from Hillsong, probably a lot of that came from Hillsong, but he was actually stepping up, and he was definitely on the same page. He was ready to go that entire year, so...
Playing scaling ADCs does not make you a passive player, right? That's like one of the reasons why Fnatic in the past was so good, is that like they would play scaling ADCs and then they would win lane because Whippo would TP bot, and then the game would be over at 5 minutes because or they would do a level 1 invade, right? Like I remember being in the LEC studio one time, and they took like Vayne Braum into like some completely doomed, awful matchup, and then level 1 invaded, and Vayne got like 3 kills. And I went to the bathroom and ran into Youngbuck and was like, "Oh hey, did you see the level 1?" And he was like, "What happened?" Vayne got a double kill. Oh, okay, GG. Like, and that was it. And the game was literally over at 2 minutes because they were really creative at getting the scaling ADC a lead. And then when the scaling ADC has a lead, like, you just win.
Of course.
Yeah, definitely. I don't completely buy it. Like, I'm on the side where I actually feel like G2 has got significantly worse. I don't think that it's just everyone else leveled up. I think other teams did get better, but I don't think that they've gotten better to the point where like G2 looks this bad when they play into them. Like I don't believe that G2 is still gonna, and like the way that you measure this is like obviously everyone is getting better all the time. So like the whole idea of like, oh, like the other teams got better, it's not that we got worse. It's like, well, everyone is supposed to be getting better, so it's relative to the other teams. Like, are you
That's
better?
kind
or
of
worse?
the point of your job.
Yeah, of course. Everyone's getting better all the time. So like the whole idea of them getting worse, it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll see at Worlds, right? Because if everyone else, if they are not worse and everyone else is just better, then Europe is going to have one of the most dominant performances at Worlds like possible. You're going to get like 2 semifinalists and like a finalist, kind of like 2019 or whatever again. Like that's or 2018 again, which I don't really think is going to happen. I feel like this might be one of the weakest showings for Europe internationally. Like I'd be surprised if a European team makes a semi. At this point,
around 8 LPL and LCK teams, we'll just throw that in there. Like,
of course,
yeah,
but
that's tough.
It's also the hardest one to ever get, top 8 at.
Yeah, that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough.
Sure. But I mean, I
earlier where he was like, I just let it pass, but when he was like, and of course, Humanoid quarterfinalist, like, the most bullshit quarterfinalist of all time. Oh, sorry, did I say that out loud? Because that one was
J-Team were not bad. J-Team were not that bad, and FPX was the world champ. Hey, we took a game off FPX.
That's true.
yeah.
It was really close to being 2-1 because we played them for tiebreaker, right? Like we were pretty even against them actually.
Yeah.
But we also entered some games against J-Team. But we tried to do a lane swap. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not completely sold on the fact that this Worlds is going to be significantly harder than last Worlds because I feel like LCK looks worse. I mean, LPL admittedly looks better, right? But LCK looks worse, and like the only difference between this Worlds and last Worlds is there's 4 LCK teams instead of 4 European teams. So like you're still going to have like the same hierarchy, and if LPL is like top 4 teams based on Worlds format, they'll probably cannibalize each other. And assuming that like Gen.G and like Dom1 are still the best 2 teams from Korea, there should be like spots in there to make semis if like EU is that good, and it's not really that G2 has lost his magic and G2 is carrying EU. So I think it's interesting, definitely coming into Worlds. And especially
one quick aside I would say is this is one area I haven't noticed anyone else has done this, is I don't even accept the premise of what Jankos was saying that they've gotten worse. Like, who's they, mate? I consider every single 5-man lineup to be different from every other 5-man lineup because I know the impact that like one player can sometimes have, even if sometimes just attitude wise. So like to me, I don't know why Jankos is ever wasting his time thinking of 2020 or 2019 G2 as having any connection to this team now. I think he would be better served literally acting as though the second Reckless walked through the door, they were a brand new team, and forget all preconceptions, because as you've seen, most of the shit they were doing in the past just doesn't even exist in this team. Players don't even play the same way. So I think they'd be in a better starting position if they just said, look at what pieces we have now, what would the best team we could make out of these pieces be, and start from there. Forget all the shit about the past. That's like that's like he's trying to write the fucking movie of his life while he's living it in real time. Like that might sound good in an interview, but I'm not really sure there's anything productive to get out of that.
Sure. All right, so I was going to end the episode here, but there's one more topic that chat keeps on suggesting over and over again, and people really want to know, which is the news that I think came out today that Dardoch is signed to an agency in Europe, and the idea is that now he is most likely going to be trying to play within EU. And I mean, what are your guys' takes on a player that is like notoriously toxic in NA, but like EU obviously is supposed to have a higher threshold for that toxicity? Will he just fit right in? Like, is he still talented enough? Like, is there, less tolerance than people might perceive? Like, what's your take on Dardoch and, him potentially playing in Europe?
I don't know the guy, so I don't know how he behaves towards his teammates. Like, I have no idea, but definitely one thing I think is for sure a thing is that like culturally toxicity is so different in Europe versus North America. I once was in North America, and we were there for Rift Rivals with Splice. And I was like helping out at some North American team, and I saw this team lose their 27th game in a row in scrims. They were 0-27 in their last 27 games.
Jesus.
Yeah, and like if that were one of my teams, people would be screaming, people would be furious. And like it was just like a normal day, and everyone was just like, okay, let's just work on this part of the game. And I don't know how like
was it
culturally...
TSM? You just tell us.
It was not TSM.
Okay.
It was.
I tried.
Get your story straight. This is in America. It was Worlds, of course that'd happen.
Oh, okay.
No.
I wasn't paying enough attention.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a bit bad for naming and shaming. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. But yeah, so this happened, and yeah, it was super surreal to watch. And I don't know if every team atmosphere is like that, but like there are certain things that just don't that are just completely different and that are like not acceptable, right? And my general feeling of having been in North America, and I'm sure you can comment on this more than I can, Tom, is that like people are really scared of like stepping on each other's toes a lot. You know?
So what I would say about this is like from my experience and just from talking to European players that are in EU teams is like when teams lose a lot in NA, they get like depressed, they get sad. Whereas like when teams lose a lot in Europe, it feels like they get angry. They're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what is this guy doing? Like, how are we gonna fucking win if like this happens? Like, there's that difference in mentality where like I feel like Americans like when our teams do poorly, it's like we feel bad for ourselves. You know, it's like, oh man, we're really just getting shit on. What's gonna happen to us? Where I feel like there's just more of that like fire, like battle back, which is like something that I feel like just I don't know how you could ever instill it into this region, but I feel like the biggest issue is that our teams don't have this mentality. And I think Acadian actually said it really well in an interview where when you listen to like international teams, it's like they go to war. Like when LPL teams are going to play, like they even say, right? It's like this team fighting. That's like their mentality of like, let's go fuck the other guys up. Where I feel like you don't get that same fire, like of like wanting to really like shit on your enemies a lot of the time in NA, which is why, you know, I was hoping that, you know, Perkz would be able to kind of instill this into his team because it felt like G2 was always like that. They had that like scrappy nature, which is kind of what I feel like has been missing since he's been gone. But yeah, I mean, to bring it back, I mean, Thorin, what are your takes on the Dardoch situation? Do you think he's like too far past his prime to make this actually work, or do you think he'll even get a shot in Europe?
The tough thing is there's two reasons it either would work or wouldn't. And the one that it wouldn't is actually a mad bomber, which is like, obviously me and you, even on this show, have talked in the past, I've said on local shows, like Europe would be the obvious place for this guy because he kept running into these problems in every team where it was always the same thing. Like we think he's a good player, but he doesn't fit the team environment, blah, blah, blah. We wish him well. And then he goes to the next team, right? So in that scenario, I always said you'd find out very quickly if he came to Europe, if he actually was toxic or he was just a guy who just has an argumentative nature. So I'd already thought it would be interesting, but this is the bomber is, dude, you're coming now when we're like on wave 4 of ERL talent harvesting. Like if you did this 3 years ago, you'd probably get into a team immediately. Like I would gamble if I was a GM, like obviously a skilled player, experience in the LCS, like you've even been in teams that were like top ranked, like you might have gotten a chance there. So my perspective is this. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that for most of the teams in LEC, it would justify actually picking him up. So I think it'd have to be ERL already, which means he's going to have to humble himself. The other side is this. There is one good reason to pick him up, and this is not a reason to dismiss in light of what we were talking about with Schalke, and it is this. Tell you what, there's very few players, if you're an LEC team in the bottom half, that you could sign that would make a bigger storyline for your team, potentially win new fans over, maybe even attract a different fucking region of fans to what, like, there's a lot of upsides if he was to join like an SK or something like that. Like, they're the sorts of teams I actually think potentially should consider gambling if they already don't have like some straight fire guy out of VRL that they know is the next, you know, the next shit.
Or their support could play
jungle.
jungle.
See it happening.
I was about to say that they could send Treats back to support.
Yeah,
not that he's been doing a bad job, but he was pretty good.
No, I mean they could send Jesses back to support and just have Treats coach the team. Knowing SK, that'd probably be their most reasonable roster change. All right, so I mean this is normally where we cut it off. I mean it's been 2 hours and 3 minutes. We've loved having you here, Mac. Like gave us a lot of insight into coaching. Normally at the end of our shows, we make sure that our guest gets everything out that they want to. Was there any topic that we did not hit that you wanted to talk about specifically on the Crackdown? If not, we can end it here, but you know, the floor is yours.
I'll finish quickly on the Dardoch topic. There's nothing else apart from that.
Sure.
I think for Dardoch, the sad thing for him is that number one, there's like COVID, which blows. So it like if I'm it would have to be ERL for sure. I don't think there are going to be many LEC teams that would take the gamble.
Some people are rumoring maybe BDS when they get in could like do something.
Possibly. Sounds unlikely to me.
Okay.
But it's possible. But like realistically, I would imagine it would be an ERL team. But like if I'm the coach or the manager of an ERL team, am I realistically going to import a North American player right now, given like the state of the world? Even without that, like given how like expensive it is just to like fly a player back and forth and sort their visa and all of this stuff that is like a massive question mark, right? Because these things take like 6 months sometimes to like actually be done. Like it's such a huge risk for that you literally just don't end up with a jungler, or he gets stuck in North America, or he gets denied access to whatever country you're in, like because America, I don't know, like some COVID situation happens, right? Like, or whatever it happens to be. Like it's such a massive risk. And the salary disparity between LCS teams, even LCS Academy, and an ERL team, like there are a lot of hurdles there for sure. But I mean, maybe he'll find somewhere. Best of luck to him. I hope he does. But yeah,
It'd be cool. Put it out with the narrative would be cool. Because I always said the same thing for Doublelift, by the way. I always wish Doublelift had come over a few years ago and gave like one go in like a good LEC team. Because then we could see how good he actually is.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Aside from that, I would just like to wish Shadow the best of luck in LPL.
Yeah.
It's been I've never had someone in LPL to actually like cheer for. It's always been the region that I just watch like to learn about the game or to get ideas or whatever it is. But now I actually have someone to cheer for. I'm very happy.
I mean, he's doing.
I wish him all the best.
He's doing super well. I did a podcast, the LPL, the last hit, with Lyric, and I think he was on one of our like top 15 players of like the overall league up until this point. So yeah, he's been really smurfing it. All right, well,
yeah, he's a great guy and he deserves it for sure.
Yeah, no, and it seems like most of the things that people were worried about, oh, he's a Lee Sin one trick. I mean, he's played Lee Sin like one game and they lost it. Like, he's been playing pretty much only meta over there and looked good on meta with like a bunch of like, players that, are reforming the lineup. So he's pretty much taken over Peanut's role within the team, and he's doing well with it. So yeah, thank you for being here, Mac. It was great. Gave us a lot of insight, really well spoken, and yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you for
thanks very much for having me.